There is a sentence so simple, yet so piercing, that once you hear it you can never forget it. The empath is the child who was never allowed to be selfish. At first, it sounds almost too plain, almost too obvious. But if you carry the weight of empathy in your bones, if you have spent your life carrying others while quietly drowning yourself, you know how much truth is hidden inside those words. Think back to the earliest years of your life. Most children are noisy, demanding, unafraid to cry out when they are hungry or tired, bold enough to say this is mine or I want that now. It is part of how a child learns their edges, how they discover that they exist as a person separate from everyone else. But for the child who becomes the empath, this stage is cut short. You learn very early that your wants were dangerous, that your feelings came at too high a cost. Perhaps when you asked for too much, you were met with silence. Perhaps when you expressed anger, you were punished. Perhaps when you showed need, love was withdrawn. And in that moment of rejection, you were taught a lesson that would shape your whole life, that your safety depended not on claiming space, but on shrinking yourself. Carl Jung recognized that children who carry this wound grow into adults who live with an invisible weight. Outwardly, they appear strong, compassionate, endlessly giving. But inside, there is a tender scar, the scar of a child who never got to fully exist. What the world admires as sensitivity and selflessness was, in truth, a survival strategy. You learned to read the room like a book because you had to. You learned to sense moods, anticipate conflict, and soften yourself to keep the peace because it was the only way to feel safe. This is how empaths are made. Not simply by nature, but by necessity. And here lies the paradox of the empath's life. You are praised for being selfless, yet that very selflessness often leaves you feeling invisible. People come to you for comfort, for understanding, for healing. They lean on your kindness, they pour their troubles into your open heart. And while you give and give, a quiet part of you aches with the question, when will anyone carry me? When will anyone see me? The world claps for your compassion, but it rarely notices your exhaustion. The world loves your giving, but it rarely asks what it costs you to give so much. This cost is not small. It seeps into every corner of life. In relationships, you may find yourself with partners who take more than they give, because deep down you were trained to accept imbalance as normal. At work, you may pour yourself into tasks, carrying the emotional labor others ignore, and still wonder why you feel unappreciated. Among friends and family, you may always be the one who listens, the one who fixes, the one who soothes, and yet feel strangely alone in your own struggles. This loneliness is not an accident. It is the voice of that child inside you, still waiting to be chosen, still longing for the day when their needs matter as much as everyone else's. And here is where Jung's insight becomes so important. He saw that individuation, the journey of becoming your true self, cannot happen until you reclaim what was taken from you in childhood. For the empath, that means reclaiming selfishness. Not in the cruel sense of using others, but in the sacred sense of daring to exist for yourself. To say no when something drains you. To say yes to joy without guilt. To rest without apology. To acknowledge that your life is not just about carrying others, but about living fully, breathing deeply, feeling your own desires, and honoring your own needs. But this shift does not come easily. For the empath, selfishness feels like a betrayal. Even the smallest act of choosing yourself can stir up guilt so heavy it feels unbearable. You may catch yourself apologizing for resting, for saying no, for not answering a message right away. You may feel the old fear rising, the fear that if you stop giving, love will disappear. This is the shadow of your childhood, whispering that you only deserve affection if you keep sacrificing. And yet, this whisper is not truth. It is conditioning. And conditioning can be broken. Healing begins the moment you realize that the guilt you feel for choosing yourself does not belong to you. It belongs to the past. It belongs to the people who taught you that your needs were too much. It belongs to the childhood where you were forced to be selfless to survive. That guilt is not your voice. This is why Jung's final message is both painful and liberating. Painful, because it forces you to see the wound behind your gift. Liberating, because it reminds you that you do not have to remain trapped in it forever. The empath is the child who was never allowed to be selfish. But as an adult, you have the power to break that pattern. You have the right to reclaim selfishness as selfhood, to take up space, to choose yourself without fear. And perhaps most importantly, to realize that your worth has never depended on how much you give. You are not loved because you erase yourself. You are not valuable because you carry everyone else's pain. You are worthy simply because you exist. And the child inside you, the one who was never allowed to want, to demand, to take, is still waiting for you to remember this. This is where the journey begins. When an empath grows up carrying the wound of never being allowed to be selfish, that wound does not stay in the past. It follows them quietly into adulthood, shaping every choice, every relationship, every feeling of worth. You may look around and see yourself in a career, in friendships, even in love, and still wonder why you feel drained, why you feel unseen, why you carry an invisible weight even on days when everything looks fine from the outside. The truth is that the child who was never allowed to claim space is still inside you, whispering in every moment of your life. Carl Jung believed that what we do not face in childhood, we repeat in adulthood. He called this the shadow, the hidden part of ourselves that carries all the pain, the guilt, the fear, and the longing we were never allowed to show. For the empath, that shadow is full of silenced cries, unspoken needs, and stolen moments of selfish joy. It is the tantrum that was never thrown, the hunger that was never satisfied, the love that was never unconditional. And because that shadow remains unseen, it begins to control us. It pulls us toward the same patterns, the same dynamics, the same imbalance that feels so strangely familiar. This is why so many empaths find themselves repeating the same painful cycles. You may notice that you attract partners who take far more than they give. You may find yourself working tirelessly in jobs where your efforts go unnoticed, while others receive the credit. You may notice that you are always the one friends turn to in crisis, yet when you are the one in pain, the room grows quiet, the phone stays silent, and you are left wondering why nobody shows up for you. At first, this feels like bad luck. But if you look closer, it is not coincidence. It is the old wound playing itself out again and again, trying to teach you something you were never taught as a child, that you are allowed to exist for yourself. And here is the cruelest part of this pattern. On the surface, people may praise you. They may tell you how strong you are, how kind, how selfless. They may admire your patience, your generosity, your capacity to love without limits. And a part of you glows with that praise because deep down you are still that child who wants to be seen, who wants to be valued. But beneath the glow is an ache, a heaviness, because you know that they are not seeing you. They are only seeing what you give. They are admiring the mask, not the person. And when the mask slips, when you finally show your exhaustion, when you dare to ask for something in return, suddenly the admiration fades. Suddenly you are told you are too much, too needy, too sensitive. And once again, you feel like the child who was punished for wanting. Jung understood that this is the trap of the empath. You become addicted to giving, not because it makes you whole, but because it is the only way you were ever taught to receive love. You learn that love must be earned, that affection must be bought with sacrifice, that belonging only comes when you erase yourself. And so, even as an adult, you find yourself repeating that bargain, giving more than you have, carrying more than you should, in the desperate hope that this time it will be enough, that this time someone will stay. But here is the turning point. The wound may have been formed in childhood, but you are not that child anymore. You are an adult with choices, with awareness, with the power to rewrite the story. Jung believed that healing comes when we turn toward the shadow, when we stop running from the pain and finally face it. For the empath, that means daring to look at the guilt, the fear, the shame that rises when you consider putting yourself first. It means noticing the old voices that whisper, if you rest, you are lazy. If you say no, you are selfish. If you take, you are unworthy. And instead of believing them, it means pausing and asking, whose voice is this? Where did I learn this? And does it really belong to me? You may be surprised at how much of what you believe about yourself is not yours at all. It is the echo of parents who were overwhelmed, of caregivers who could not handle your needs, of family members who shamed you for wanting more. It is the echo of a society that values productivity over presence, giving over receiving, silence over truth. None of it is your true voice. Beneath the echoes, beneath the guilt, there is another voice waiting. A quiet, steady voice that says, I deserve to exist. I deserve to take up space. I deserve to be loved for who I am, not just for what I give. The journey of healing begins when you start listening to that voice. At first, it will feel faint, almost fragile. You may doubt it. You may dismiss it. But with time, with practice, with small acts of courage, it grows louder. Every time you say no when you mean no, the voice grows stronger. Every time you rest without apology, it grows steadier. Every time you ask for help, every time you choose joy, every time you dare to be seen in your rawness instead of your performance, the voice begins to replace the old echoes. And slowly, the empath who was once trapped in self-erasure begins to awaken. Imagine this shift for a moment. Imagine a life where your giving is no longer rooted in fear, but in freedom. Imagine loving others not because you have to, but because you choose to. Imagine setting boundaries without guilt, resting without shame, and receiving without apology. This is not selfishness in the way you were taught to fear it. This is sacred selfishness, the kind that honors the child inside you and says, you matter too. And when you begin to live this way, something extraordinary happens. You no longer attract the takers who prey on your selflessness. You no longer repeat the old cycles of abuse and imbalance. Instead, you begin to draw in people who see you, who respect you, who love not just what you give but who you are. You begin to feel whole, because for the first time in your life, you are no longer abandoning yourself. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of individuation. It is not about becoming perfect, or endlessly giving, or transcending your humanity. It is about becoming real, about embracing every part of yourself, even the parts you were told to hide. For the empath, individuation means stepping out of the role of caretaker and into the fullness of being a person. It means breaking free from the belief that love must be earned, and realizing that love is your birthright. The empath is the child who was never allowed to be selfish. But healing means you no longer have to live as that child. Healing means you can finally grow into the adult who chooses freely, who gives from fullness, who loves without losing themselves. And when you do, you discover something remarkable. You realize that your empathy, the very thing that was once born of survival, becomes even more powerful when it is rooted in freedom. You no longer give to avoid rejection, you give because your heart is overflowing. You no longer sacrifice yourself to keep others close, you walk beside those who honor your boundaries. You no longer disappear into other people's pain, you stand in your own light, and from that light you bring comfort without losing yourself. This is the beginning of the empath's true power. And so the empath grows into adulthood carrying a paradox inside them, a split that has existed since their earliest memories. Outwardly, they are the one everyone can count on. Friends describe them as loyal, endlessly understanding, always there in a crisis. Family leans on them as the problem solver, the one who smooths over tension before it turns into conflict. Strangers can feel it too, that quiet openness, that almost invisible signal that here is a person who will not turn you away, who will listen even when they are tired, who will hold space even when they themselves are hurting. The empath becomes the soft landing place in a world that is hard and unyielding. But inwardly, there is another reality. The reality of exhaustion that no amount of sleep erases. The reality of loneliness that persists, even in rooms full of people. The reality of a soul that has spent so long catering to others that it has forgotten the taste of its own voice. For the empath, adulthood often becomes a stage where they keep acting out the same role they learned as children, the caretaker, the peacekeeper, the giver. Only now, the stakes are higher, and the audience is larger. They may be admired for their kindness, but admiration does not ease the quiet ache of never truly belonging to themselves. Carl Jung once said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. For the empath, this truth cuts painfully deep. Fate seems to repeat itself in cruel patterns. They find themselves gravitating toward the same kinds of people, the takers, the controllers, the ones who recognize that the empath will always bend, always compromise, always give. romantic partners who mirror the neglect of childhood, friends who lean heavily on their kindness but vanish when the empath is in need, employers who exploit their loyalty, rewarding sacrifice with more demands. Each time, it feels strangely familiar, as though the script has already been written, and the empath already knows their lines. Why does this happen? It is not weakness. It is not bad luck. It is the unconscious seeking resolution. The inner child, still carrying the imprint of early wounds, still searching for the love that never came, repeats the pattern in the hope that maybe this time it will end differently. Maybe this time the giving will be enough. Maybe this time the other person will finally see them, cherish them, protect them. But no matter how much they pour out, the ending is the same. The empath is left depleted, wondering what more they could have given, what more they could have done. Over time, the toll is not just emotional. It is physical. The empath feels fatigue that no rest seems to heal. Their bodies hold the stress, in tight shoulders, in headaches, in stomach pains, in the subtle but constant sense that they are carrying too much. Their emotions, once flowing and responsive, begin to harden. Smiles feel like masks. Conversations feel draining. They may even find themselves withdrawing, not because they do not care, but because caring has become too heavy. The soul itself begins to whisper in protest, warning that something is deeply out of balance. This is the moment when the shadow begins to surface. Jung believed the shadow is not our enemy but our unacknowledged truth. For the empath, the shadow carries everything they were told to bury. It holds the anger they swallowed as children, the rage of being unheard, unseen, dismissed. It holds the longing to be selfish, not in a cruel way, but in the natural human desire to sometimes put the self first. It holds the right to say no, the right to walk away, the right to demand respect. It holds the desire for rest, for solitude, for space. It holds boundaries, those invisible lines that say this is mine, and it must be protected. Yet the empath has been trained to fear this shadow. They were taught that anger is dangerous, that selfishness is shameful, that saying no makes them unlovable. So they avoid it, terrified of what it might mean. But Jung taught that the shadow, when ignored, rules us from the dark. The empath cannot escape it forever. Their exhaustion, their resentment, their quiet despair are all signs that the shadow is pressing at the door, demanding to be seen. The awakening does not always happen in one dramatic moment. Sometimes, it arrives quietly. Perhaps late at night, when they find themselves staring at the ceiling, realizing that their life feels like it belongs to everyone but them. Perhaps during a small interaction, when they hear themselves saying yes and suddenly feel their whole body rebel against the word. Perhaps in the silence after another heartbreak, when they are left wondering how much more they can give before there is nothing left. These are the moments when the unconscious begins to break through. These are the moments when the empath begins to sense that something has to change. And then comes the most radical thought of all. It does not arrive like thunder. It does not roar. It whispers, "What if I matter just as much as everyone else?" At first, the empath recoils. The thought feels dangerous, selfish, even wrong. But slowly it lingers. What if I was allowed to rest? What if I was allowed to say no? What if love did not have to be earned by sacrifice? What if being myself was enough? This is the seed of individuation, Jung's vision of becoming whole. For the empath, it is the beginning of a revolution. The child who was never allowed to be selfish begins to reclaim their right to exist. The adult who has lived as a giver begins to remember that they too are human, with needs and limits and desires that are just as valid as anyone else's. The empath who has been lost in patterns of survival begins, at last, to awaken. It is not an easy path. It requires courage to face the shadow, to reclaim the anger, to honor the boundaries, to allow selfishness to exist without shame. But it is the only path that leads to wholeness. And though the world may resist, though others may not understand, the empath is finally beginning to step into their own life. And that is where the real journey begins. And now the empath begins to step into a world they never realized was waiting for them, a world that has always existed, quietly, beneath the noise of demands and expectations, beneath the weight of obligations, beneath the unrelenting pressure to give without pause. It is the world of their own life, of their own heart, of their own needs, desires, and boundaries. At first, it is just a whisper, a subtle awareness that stirs within them. Perhaps it is the thought that they are allowed to rest without guilt. Perhaps it is the realization that saying no does not make them bad or unlovable. Perhaps it is the dawning sense that their own happiness is not something to be sacrificed endlessly for others. And though the whisper is soft, it carries a force that is impossible to ignore, a force that begins to pull them gently, insistently toward themselves. This is the beginning of individuation, Jung's concept of becoming whole, of reclaiming all the parts of the self that were once hidden, denied, or silenced. For the empath, it is not simply about being selfish, in the childish sense, but about learning that their existence, their feelings, and their choices have intrinsic value. It is about showing the inner child, the one who was never allowed to be selfish, that it is safe now, that it is safe to want, to feel, to rest, to take up space in the world without fear of abandonment or rejection. It is about acknowledging the shadow, those parts of themselves that were pushed away, and welcoming them home. The process is not linear, and it is not easy. It begins with noticing patterns, the recurring cycles that have defined their life for so long. They see the friends who take endlessly without giving in return. They see the partners who demand emotional labor and attention, yet vanish when the empath is in need. They see the workplaces that exploit their loyalty, expecting unwavering commitment, while offering little support. And with this awareness comes both clarity and grief. The empath begins to understand that these patterns are not coincidences. They are echoes of childhood wounds, unconscious repetitions of lessons learned long ago, that love must be earned, that selflessness is required, that their own needs are secondary. But in the clarity comes courage. Quiet courage, almost imperceptible, yet unstoppable. The empath begins to experiment with boundaries, testing them gently at first. They may say no to a friend's request without collapsing inside. They may step away from an obligation without apologizing or justifying. They may take moments of rest simply because they need them. And in each act of claiming themselves, they feel a subtle shift, a gentle expansion of their inner space that had long been compressed by the weight of caring for everyone else. As they practice these small acts of self-possession, something remarkable begins to happen. They start to notice changes in the relationships around them. Some people are unsettled, uncomfortable with this new self-aware presence, and they step back. But others are drawn closer, magnetized by the authenticity and groundedness that comes from someone who is no longer constantly bending to meet external expectations. They attract people who value them not for what they provide, but for who they are. And in doing so, they begin to understand that true connection is never transactional, never earned by exhaustion, never dependent on erasing the self. It is rooted in mutual respect, recognition, and presence. Yet even as the empath experiences these shifts, the old voices linger. The inner critic whispers that selfishness is shameful, that love must always be conditional, that their worth is measured by sacrifice. And each time these voices appear, the empath has a choice, to believe them, or to recognize them as remnants of childhood wounds that no longer define them. Every choice to honor the self, every boundary set, every yes spoken to their own needs, weakens the hold of these old patterns and strengthens the inner truth. They are allowed to exist fully, freely, and lovingly for themselves. The empath now begins to feel the true power of their gift. Empathy, once a burden born from survival and fear of abandonment, transforms into conscious compassion. They can feel deeply without being consumed. They can care without losing themselves. They can love without sacrificing their own well-being. They learn that their emotions are not chains to be endured, but tools to guide them toward truth. They realize that giving from fullness, rather than obligation, creates a resonance that is magnetic, restorative, and authentic. And in this space, the child they once carried silently begins to relax, begins to smile, begins to trust that it is safe to be seen. And so the empath steps fully into life in a new way. They are no longer defined by the endless cycles of giving and depletion. They are no longer bound by the invisible chains of expectations that were imposed on them. They are learning that self-love is not selfish. They are discovering that boundaries are not cruel. They are finally recognizing that their feelings, desires, and existence are not only valid, but necessary. And in this recognition, they find a profound sense of peace, not loud or flashy, but deep, calm, and enduring, like the still surface of a lake after the storm has passed. This peace is a gift of Jungian individuation, a sign that the empath has begun to reclaim the wholeness that was always theirs to claim. They are still compassionate. They are still deeply feeling. But they are now anchored, grounded, and aligned. They have learned that being an empath is not a curse to escape, but a sacred gift to embrace, one that shines brightest when it is rooted in self-respect, self-care, and conscious awareness. And as they move forward, carrying the child who was once silenced, the shadow that was once feared, and the adult who now chooses themselves, they begin to live with quiet power. A power that is not about control, domination, or constant doing, but about presence, awareness, and integrity. The empath is no longer just a caretaker for others. They are a caretaker for themselves, and in doing so, they become capable of love and compassion that is sustainable, balanced, and profoundly life-giving. And now the empath stands at the threshold of a new life, a life that once felt impossible, a life that was always whispered of in the quiet moments of longing and exhaustion. They have carried the weight of the world for so long that it feels almost unnatural to turn inward, to pay attention to their own needs, to honor the rhythms of their own heart. But the moment has come. The moment when the child who was silenced begins to take up space. The moment when the shadow, once feared, has been embraced. The moment when the adult who has survived, who has endured, who has given endlessly, finally says yes to themselves. The awakening is not sudden. It unfolds like a sunrise, slow and patient, illuminating the inner landscape that has been neglected for decades. The empath notices how different the world feels when it is approached from a place of self-possession rather than depletion. Conversations no longer feel like drains on the soul but like opportunities to connect with clarity and presence. Relationships no longer pull them into unconscious cycles of giving and loss but reflect the truth that healthy connection is mutual, respectful, and conscious. Even their own emotions, once overwhelming and confusing, become guides rather than burdens, signaling when to act, when to rest, and when to reclaim the self that has long been overlooked. Jung described individuation as the process of becoming who we truly are, integrating the conscious and unconscious, embracing shadow and light. For the empath, this stage is nothing less than profound liberation. They learn to hold space for their own pain without guilt. They learn that anger is not shameful, but a signal of boundaries needing protection. They learn that desire is not selfish, but a compass guiding them toward authenticity. They learn that saying no is not cruelty, but a declaration of self-respect. And in learning these truths, they begin to reclaim the parts of themselves that were never allowed to breathe. The curious child, the wounded child, the playful child, the fearless child, all returning, not scattered, but whole, inside them. The empath also begins to notice how their energy transforms. Where once they were drained by constant giving, now they are replenished by deliberate, conscious care that begins with themselves. They begin to recognize that empathy is a gift when it is given freely, not out of obligation or fear. They understand that they can feel deeply, love profoundly, and still preserve their own boundaries. They see that their sensitivity, once considered a liability, is actually a superpower, allowing them to navigate the world with clarity, intuition, and emotional intelligence that many cannot comprehend. Yet the journey is still tender. Old voices echo from the past, reminding them of rules they were taught to follow, that selfishness is wrong, that love must be earned, that giving is the highest virtue. And each time these echoes arise, the empath pauses, breathing deeply, remembering the truth they have reclaimed. They remind themselves that self-love is not arrogance. They remind themselves that rest is not weakness. They remind themselves that their feelings are valid, their needs are important, and their existence is enough without constant approval from others. This is where the empath realizes the final, most profound truth of their journey, that they are no longer bound by the cycles of the past. The inner child is not lost, the shadow is not feared, and the adult who emerges is fully integrated. They have learned that they are not responsible for fixing everyone, not responsible for earning love through sacrifice, and not responsible for filling spaces that were never theirs to fill. They are free to exist, fully and authentically, in their own life. And this freedom, once unimaginable, becomes their foundation, their sanctuary, their guiding light. With this freedom comes a quiet power. It is the power to choose who they allow into their lives, the power to set boundaries without fear, the power to love without losing themselves, and the power to honor every aspect of who they are. The empath learns that their gift is strongest not when it is exhausted and depleted, but when it is rooted in self-awareness, self-respect, and self-compassion. They understand that they can pour love into the world without losing themselves because their well is full, replenished by deliberate care and conscious attention. And in this final stage, the empath discovers something extraordinary. They recognize that all the suffering, all the exhaustion, all the moments of doubt and despair were not wasted. Each pain, each heartbreak, each cycle of depletion was a teacher guiding them toward wholeness. Each moment of self-neglect revealed the boundaries that must be honored. Each act of giving without reciprocation illuminated the lessons of conscious empathy. And when they finally integrate all of this, the empath experiences a sense of peace and power so profound that it reshapes their entire experience of life. This is the stage Jung pointed to as the final integration, a life lived consciously, emotionally, and spiritually aligned. The empath who once felt lost, invisible, and unworthy now moves through the world with confidence, groundedness, and inner harmony. They are sensitive, yes, but no longer at the mercy of external chaos. They are caring, yes, but no longer depleted by obligation. They are compassionate, yes, but no longer sacrificing themselves for validation or survival. And in this, they become a living testament to the idea that the child who was never allowed to be selfish can grow into an adult who loves fully, gives wisely, and exists unapologetically. And so the journey comes full circle. The empath has learned that being sensitive is not a weakness, that emotional depth is not a curse, and that self-love is not selfish. They have reclaimed the child within, integrated the shadow, and stepped fully into the adult who chooses themselves. And in this choice, they find not just freedom, but a quiet, enduring joy, the kind of joy that comes from knowing they are enough, they are whole, and they are finally home within themselves. You know the ache that lingers long after someone has left. It is not a simple sadness, and it is not something you can name easily. It is a hollow in your chest, a quiet trembling in your bones, a whisper in your mind that asks if you were ever truly enough. For years you gave everything, your attention, your patience, your heart, and yet it never seemed to matter. You felt like a vessel, endlessly pouring into someone who would never fill themselves, and slowly, quietly, you began to lose pieces of yourself. Being an empath after narcissistic abuse is like standing in a storm that no one else can see. Every glance, every tone, every subtle manipulation becomes a tidal wave you feel in your chest, in your stomach, in your bones. You begin to absorb emotions that are not yours. You internalize criticism disguised as concern. You feel guilt for things that were never your responsibility. And in this constant giving, in this ceaseless attention to another's needs, you begin to forget what it feels like to exist for yourself. Carl Jung described the shadow as the parts of ourselves we refuse to see, the suppressed, the hidden, the unclaimed. For an empath emerging from narcissistic abuse, the shadow is not only fear or anger. It is every fragment of your own identity that was erased. It is the voice that learned to whisper only to be silenced. It is the spark of joy that was muted in the presence of manipulation. It is the part of you that longed to say no, that wanted to walk away, that wanted freedom, but was taught that these desires were selfish, wrong, or dangerous. The final stage, Jung would say, is reclaiming these lost pieces. It is not easy. It does not come in a day, a week, or even a year. It begins in tiny, trembling steps, noticing your own needs for the first time in years. Breathing without holding the weight of another's chaos. Feeling without guilt. Speaking your truth without apology. Each step feels monumental, because for so long you were told that the world mattered more than you. That your voice could be borrowed, your heart could be borrowed, your soul could be borrowed. And now, for the first time, you begin to remember that none of it needed to be. The first sign of awakening is subtle. You may notice a hesitation before you answer, a pause in your automatic reflex to fix or soothe. You may feel the unfamiliar relief of being able to say no and still exist. You may find yourself watching someone manipulate and realizing that you are no longer caught in their web. These are small victories, invisible to the outside world, but profound in their significance. Because every moment you reclaim your energy, you reclaim yourself. This stage is also terrifying. The same heart that absorbed abuse now wants to assert itself. It wants to stretch, to breathe, to claim space. And fear rises, fear that being firm makes you cruel, fear that asserting boundaries will push people away, fear that if you finally choose yourself, you will be left alone. But here is the paradox of the empath. Choosing yourself does not mean shutting out the world. It means stepping into it with clarity, with presence, with strength. It means seeing the difference between what belongs to you and what belongs to others. And in this clarity, you begin to see the patterns you were blind to before. You see the way charm masked cruelty. You see how apologies were used to control. You see how love was twisted into obligation. And as painful as this realization is, it is also freeing. Because understanding these patterns gives you power. You no longer walk blindly into manipulation. You no longer question your own instincts. You no longer accept less than you deserve. And for the first time, you realize that the empathy you thought was a weakness is in fact your greatest strength, once it is aligned with awareness. Jung described individuation as the process of integrating all parts of the self, the light and the shadow, the vulnerable and the strong, the sensitive and the assertive. For an empath after abuse, this means reclaiming the voice that was silenced, reclaiming the energy that was drained, reclaiming the joy that was stolen. It is learning to feel deeply without being consumed, to love without surrendering yourself, to see and understand without being enslaved by the pain of others. This is not a small undertaking. It is the work of a lifetime. And it is the work that leads to true freedom. In the early moments of this stage, the world may still feel heavy. Memories of manipulation may resurface. Emotions you thought you buried may rise unbidden. You may feel waves of anger, grief, or confusion. And that is normal. These are the echoes of the pieces of yourself that were hidden, calling to be acknowledged. Instead of running from them, the empath learns to meet them gently, to sit with them, to feel them fully without judgment. And with each encounter, the shadow loses its power to control you. Each piece of pain reclaimed becomes a piece of strength. Eventually, the empath begins to understand something profound. Peace is not the absence of others, not the erasure of past wounds, not the avoidance of manipulation. Peace is the presence of self. It is the awareness of your own boundaries, your own needs, your own voice. It is the ability to hold space for yourself in a world that often demands you disappear. It is the quiet confidence that comes from knowing who you are and what you will no longer tolerate. And slowly, gradually, you begin to feel whole again. Not because the world has changed, not because the abuser has vanished, but because you have changed. You have reclaimed the energy that was stolen. You have recognized your worth beyond what anyone else told you it was. You have met your shadow, embraced it, and integrated it into a stronger, wiser self. You have learned to love yourself in ways you once thought impossible. This is the beginning of the final stage that Jung described, the stage where the empath no longer simply survives abuse, but rises above it, where sensitivity becomes power, where compassion becomes clarity, where the heart that once feared its own strength now beats in harmony with its deepest truth. And though the journey continues, and though the road is still winding, each step forward is a triumph. Each breath is a claim to your own life. Each moment of self-recognition is a victory over the years of manipulation and self-doubt. The empath who reaches this stage is no longer defined by the abuse they endured. They are defined by the courage it took to face it, to understand it, and to rise beyond it. They are defined by the willingness to see themselves clearly, to honor their own needs, and to hold their own light. And when this dawns fully, something miraculous happens. The empath experiences a freedom they never imagined possible, a serenity they never thought they deserved, and a deep, unshakable connection to themselves that no one can take away. As the empath moves deeper into this stage, the first realization is often subtle, a small sense of distance from the storm that once consumed them. You begin to notice that the compulsive need to fix, to soothe, to anticipate the moods of others, is no longer automatic. That invisible weight on your chest has loosened, if only slightly. You may catch yourself pausing before reacting, and in that pause, there is a quiet spark of awareness. This spark is the beginning of reclaiming your power, and it is more precious than any comfort the world has ever offered. For years, the abuser convinced you that your feelings were wrong, that your instincts were faulty, that your empathy made you weak. And for a long time, you believed it. You doubted yourself in ways that left you exhausted, anxious, and hollow. But now, in this awakening, you start to hear another voice, faint at first, but growing steadily. It is the voice that says, "I was not wrong to feel. I was not weak to care. I am not defined by how someone else treated me." And as this voice strengthens, you begin to understand that your sensitivity is not a flaw, but a compass, guiding you toward your own truth. This stage brings the difficult work of reclaiming boundaries. Boundaries may feel unnatural at first. You were trained to ignore your own limits, to bend, to absorb, to tolerate the unacceptable. Saying no may feel like betrayal. Walking away may feel like guilt. But each time you honor yourself, even in small ways, you are retraining your nervous system, rewiring the patterns that kept you captive. You learn that boundaries are not walls designed to push others away, but bridges built to protect your energy while still allowing authentic connection. And then comes the confrontation with memory. Narcissistic abuse leaves imprints that echo long after the events have passed. You may replay conversations in your head, question your own perceptions, or feel the pangs of manipulation years later. This is the shadow whispering, reminding you of wounds still raw. But Jung would say that shadows are not enemies, they are teachers. For the empath, these memories are not meant to shame you, but to illuminate the parts of yourself that need care, attention, and reclamation. Facing them is not weakness. It is the courage of true individuation, of claiming your wholeness piece by piece. In the quiet of reflection, you may notice how much you have carried that was never yours. Guilt, blame, anger, fear, all of it absorbed as if it belonged to you. The process of reclaiming self begins with recognizing that you are not responsible for the manipulation or cruelty of others. You did not cause it. You did not deserve it. And every time you affirm this truth, you chip away at the invisible chains that once bound your heart. This stage is also where empathy transforms from vulnerability into wisdom. You begin to see the difference between compassion and overextension. You can care deeply without being consumed. You can notice suffering without taking it into your body. You can respond with understanding without losing yourself in the other's pain. This is the alchemy of the empath emerging from abuse, sensitivity refined into insight, love shaped into discernment, heart tempered with boundaries. And as you strengthen in this way, something remarkable occurs. You begin to recognize patterns not only in your past but in the present. You notice the subtle signs of manipulation before they take hold. You see charm that masks control. You feel the undertones of guilt used to manipulate. And with this awareness comes freedom. Freedom to choose who you allow into your energy, who you give your time and attention to, and who you protect yourself from entirely. The empath also begins to rediscover self-compassion. For years, you may have blamed yourself for what happened, believing that somehow, your sensitivity invited abuse. Now you start to gently say, "I did the best I could with the tools I had. I am not to blame. I am learning. I am worthy of protection, care, and love." Each repetition of this truth strengthens the nervous system, calms the heart, and nurtures the soul. It is not an abstract exercise, it is a lifeline, a bridge back to your own presence. Creativity and joy slowly return as well. Energy once consumed by survival now flows back into you. You may find pleasure in simple acts, walking in nature, writing your thoughts, listening to music, connecting with people who respect your boundaries. These are not luxuries, they are markers of your healing. Each laugh, each smile, Each spark of curiosity is proof that you are reclaiming the life that was once overshadowed by fear and manipulation. And there is something profoundly sacred in the way the empath now interacts with the world. Compassion remains, but it is guided by clarity. Sensitivity remains, but it is no longer a liability. The heart that once absorbed harm now radiates discernment. You begin to see people clearly, their intentions, their strengths, their weaknesses, without taking them personally. You respond rather than react. You hold space without sacrificing yourself. And in this, your presence becomes a kind of quiet power, magnetic, steady, and impossible to exploit. This is the stage where the empath begins to understand what Jung called individuation in its deepest sense, not simply surviving, not merely reacting, but fully integrating every part of the self. Vulnerability is no longer weakness. It is the courage to feel without being enslaved. Sensitivity is no longer burden. It is the capacity to connect, to witness, and to heal. And as you walk further along this path, each day carries a small triumph, a moment of clarity, a breath of freedom, a spark of your own light that was once buried under the weight of abuse. The journey is far from over, and yet, in this stage, the empath finally glimpses the horizon of possibility, a life in which their heart is honored, their soul is protected, and their sensitivity becomes their superpower rather than their shackle. The final stage is not a destination, but a process of continual reclamation, a deepening of self, a cultivation of peace that can survive the chaos of the world and the echoes of past pain. And in the quiet moments, when no one is watching, when the memories fade just enough to allow breathing, you realize something profound. The empath who survived narcissistic abuse is no longer defined by the abuse itself. They are defined by the courage it took to rise above it, to reclaim their energy, to integrate their shadow, and to step fully into the gift that sensitivity brings. As you continue along this path, the empath begins to notice something extraordinary, a quiet reclamation of self that grows stronger each day. It begins with awareness. Where once your energy was consumed by the moods and manipulations of another, you now notice the space between stimulus and reaction. That pause, so small, so subtle, becomes a doorway. A doorway where your soul can step through and say, "This is mine. This is my moment. This is my heart." For so long, you were a mirror, reflecting what the abuser wanted you to reflect. Your needs, your desires, your instincts were distorted, minimized, or silenced altogether. And now, in the quiet of your own mind, you begin to recognize your reflection once again, not the distorted one, but the original, unaltered self. You see the parts of you that were hidden, the creativity that was muted, the curiosity that was dampened, the courage that was buried. You start to remember who you were before the abuse, and in doing so, you reclaim the foundation of who you are meant to be. This reclamation is not linear. There are waves of doubt, moments when the memories resurface with all their old intensity, when fear creeps back into the edges of your heart. And yet, each time you meet these waves with patience and compassion, you realize they no longer have the power to sweep you away. You learn to stand in the center of your own being, letting the waves wash past without taking them in. You understand deeply that the abuse is in the past, that its power over you exists only if you allow it. And slowly, steadily, you begin to allow yourself to breathe again. At this stage, the empath also begins to reconnect with emotion in its purest form. For years, feelings were dangerous, misread, punished. You may have learned to hide your tears, to swallow your joy, to censor your laughter. But now, in reclaiming yourself, you discover that it is safe to feel again. The heart that once trembled under criticism now has room for love, for awe, for wonder. You notice beauty in simple moments. The sunlight streaming through a window, the sound of leaves rustling, a melody that rises in your chest. Every sensation becomes a reminder that life itself is meant to be experienced fully, and that your capacity to feel is a gift, not a liability. Jung would call this stage individuation, the full integration of shadow and self. For the empath, it is the stage where understanding the shadow is no longer about shame or blame, but about awareness and reclamation. You face the parts of yourself that internalize guilt, anger, fear, and self-doubt. You see the fragments of your identity that were given away in the hope of love, approval, or safety. And instead of rejecting them, you embrace them. You acknowledge the pain, honor it, and transform it into wisdom. The darkness that once threatened to consume you becomes a guide, showing you the contours of your true self. This process transforms your relationships in profound ways. You begin to understand that empathy is not submission. Compassion is not weakness. Sensitivity is not a trap. You can connect deeply without sacrificing your boundaries. You can love fully without losing yourself. You can listen without absorbing the pain of others. And in this clarity, the people who are meant to remain in your life, those who respect and honor your presence, are drawn to you naturally. They sense your authenticity, your steadiness, your strength, and they respond in kind. Conversely, the patterns that once trapped you now become visible. You can recognize charm that hides manipulation. You can feel the subtle pull of guilt or obligation designed to control. You can sense when someone seeks to use your heart as a tool rather than a space of mutual respect. And when you recognize it, you no longer engage in the old cycles. You no longer take on what is not yours. You no longer betray your own needs for the comfort of another. Each refusal, each act of discernment, is a victory. Each boundary drawn is a reclamation of self, a brick laid in the foundation of your freedom. In this stage, creativity, joy, and purpose awaken like never before. Energy that was once siphoned by survival is now yours to wield. You may feel inspired to write, to create, to move, to explore ideas that once felt distant or impossible. The world itself seems brighter, more textured, more alive. You notice connections, patterns, and opportunities that were hidden when your vision was clouded by constant vigilance and emotional labor. And with each act of creation, each small spark of joy, you reinforce the truth: you are not defined by abuse, you are defined by resilience, by courage, by the conscious choice to live fully. A profound layer of transformation also occurs within your inner dialogue. The voice that once berated, shamed, or silenced you begins to soften. You learn to speak gently to yourself, to recognize your efforts, to honor your limits. You stop apologizing for being sensitive, for needing space, for prioritizing your well-being. You replace self-criticism with encouragement. You replace doubt with trust in your own instincts. And in doing so, the empath becomes a true witness to their own life, present, grounded, and aware of the profound value of their own existence. Jung believed that wholeness is achieved when we integrate every part of ourselves: the light, the dark, the fragile, the strong. For the empath who has survived narcissistic abuse, this stage is the living embodiment of that teaching. You are no longer a victim of circumstance, a prisoner of manipulation, or a slave to fear. You are a conscious presence, capable of discernment, love, and compassion that does not harm you. You have learned that freedom is not simply the absence of abuse. It is the presence of self, fully realized, fully honored, fully awake. And perhaps the most profound gift of this stage is the recognition of your own power. Sensitivity is no longer a weakness to hide. Boundaries are no longer rules to fear. Empathy is no longer a trap to fall into. Your capacity to feel deeply is now aligned with wisdom, courage, and clarity. You can move through the world without fear, with purpose, and with grace. You can help others without losing yourself. You can love without surrendering. You can exist without apology, because you have reclaimed the right to exist fully on your own terms. This stage is not the end of growth, but it is the first glimpse of true mastery. It is a threshold where the empath begins to understand that life is not something to endure, but something to engage with consciously. You have survived what was meant to break you. You have faced the darkness and emerged with a heart that is not hardened, but sharpened. You have learned that true freedom comes not from avoiding pain, but from reclaiming your soul in its entirety. And in this realization, the empath stands poised for the final ascent, the stage where sensitivity becomes strength, where compassion becomes clarity, where the lessons of abuse are transformed into the wisdom to live fully, and where the final stage of Jung's individuation can unfold in all its power and beauty. By the time the empath reaches this stage, a subtle transformation has already begun, but now it deepens into something undeniable. The old patterns of absorption, self-doubt, and constant vigilance are slowly giving way to presence, clarity, and discernment. You notice your own energy in ways that were impossible before. You feel the difference between what belongs to you and what belongs to others. You can sense the pull of manipulation from a distance, without panic, without internalizing it, without losing your center. This awareness is not born overnight. It is the accumulation of countless tiny victories, small moments of self-assertion, quiet acts of boundary setting that slowly reclaim the core of who you are. Here, in this stage, the empath begins to experience a profound inner stillness. It is not the absence of emotion, for your heart still feels deeply, but it is the absence of chaos within. You are no longer tossed by every tide of criticism, guilt, or subtle control. You can observe these forces without letting them dictate your actions or warp your sense of self. Jung would describe this as a conscious confrontation with the shadow, the dark, hidden, or disowned parts of the self, but for the empath, it is also a confrontation with the shadows imposed by others. The manipulations, the gaslighting, the subtle cruelties that once made you doubt your very existence are no longer invisible enemies. They are recognized, named, and no longer allowed to dominate your internal world. In this stage, the empath begins to feel the first real sense of autonomy after abuse. Decisions that once felt terrifying, saying no, walking away, choosing solitude, now carry a quiet confidence. You realize that your life belongs to you, not to those who sought to control or diminish you. This autonomy does not make you unkind or distant, it simply restores balance. You can still love, still connect, still care, but now from a place of fullness rather than depletion. This is the radical gift of reclaiming self, the ability to operate in the world with empathy that is empowered rather than exploited. The emotions that arise at this stage are complex. You may feel relief, liberation, and pride, but you may also feel grief, anger, or even guilt. These feelings are natural, and they are part of the process. They signal that you are uncovering layers of the self that were buried under abuse. Each wave of emotion that surfaces is an invitation to witness, to integrate, and to honor your own experience. Jung would suggest that embracing these emotions, rather than denying or suppressing them, is the path toward wholeness. The empath who allows themselves to fully feel, without being swept away, begins to reclaim the depth and authenticity of their being. At this stage, the empath also begins to cultivate self-compassion in a way that feels revolutionary. For years, you may have blamed yourself for what happened, believed that your sensitivity was a weakness, or thought that your love made you vulnerable to manipulation. Now you start to whisper to yourself the words you needed to hear all along. I did not deserve this. My heart is precious. My feelings are valid. I am worthy of care, of respect, of joy. These affirmations are not abstract concepts. They are lifelines, slowly rewiring the nervous system, repairing the self, and reclaiming the internal authority that abuse once stole. This stage brings a new clarity in relationships. You begin to recognize the subtle distinctions between love and obligation, empathy and exploitation, care and control. You learn to see the people in your life for who they truly are, not who you hoped they would be. Those who honor your boundaries, respect your heart, and cherish your presence naturally remain. Those who seek to manipulate, drain, or control are no longer allowed to occupy space in your life. And each act of discernment is a quiet triumph, reinforcing the truth that your energy is yours to protect, your heart is yours to guard, and your life is yours to live fully. You also begin to notice a subtle recalibration of your own internal compass. Your intuition, once clouded by doubt, begins to guide you with clarity. You trust your instincts without fear. You notice emotional cues in yourself and others without being overwhelmed by them. The empath who once absorbed every fluctuation now channels that sensitivity into insight, discernment, and measured compassion. This is the stage where empathy transforms into a conscious, sustainable power, a tool for connection rather than a vulnerability to exploitation. Creativity and joy become natural companions again. Energy that was once spent surviving begins to flow freely into expression. You may feel inspired to create, to write, to explore, to build. The world opens up in ways that were previously obscured by the weight of manipulation and internalized chaos. Every act of creation, every spark of curiosity, every moment of playful engagement becomes a reinforcement of selfhood, a declaration that you exist, fully and authentically, in a world that once sought to diminish you. Jungian insight deepens here. Individuation is no longer an abstract goal, it is a lived experience. You are integrating light and shadow, strength and vulnerability, sensitivity and discernment. You are reclaiming the fragments of yourself that were surrendered, silenced, or stolen. You are learning that your capacity to feel deeply is not a weakness to hide, but a power to cultivate. And as you continue this integration, the empath begins to operate in the world with a rare balance, open to connection, but protected, loving, but discerning, sensitive, but empowered. Finally, in this stage, the empath begins to glimpse what true freedom feels like. It is not the absence of challenge, not the erasure of past pain, not the avoidance of difficult people or situations. It is the presence of self, a steady, unwavering, compassionate, fully embodied self that can move through the world without fear of being lost again. The heart that once feared its own strength now beats in harmony with its deepest truth. The mind that once doubted its instincts now trusts them. And the soul that once carried the burden of another's manipulation now walks lightly in its own power. This stage is a preparation for the final ascent. The empath who has reached this point is no longer a victim, a mirror, or a vessel for others' chaos. They are a conscious presence, a steward of their own energy, and a witness to their own life. They are ready to step into the ultimate stage of integration, where sensitivity, compassion, and discernment fuse into a clarity that allows them to navigate the world fully awake, fully empowered, and fully alive. At last, the empath stands at the edge of a new understanding, a place where the past no longer dictates the rhythm of the heart. The memories of manipulation, the subtle cruelties, the quiet gaslighting, they still exist, but they are no longer chains. They are lessons etched into the soul, reminders of what has been endured and what has been overcome. In this final stage, the empath does not deny the pain, does not minimize the suffering, and does not pretend it never mattered. Instead, they hold it gently, alongside the parts of themselves that were buried, silenced, or given away. This is the fullness of integration, where shadow and light, vulnerability and strength, sensitivity and clarity coexist in a single, resilient self. Here, in the quiet of inner recognition, the empath begins to feel an almost sacred confidence. It is not arrogance or ego, but a deep knowing that they can exist fully, without fear, without apology, without compromise of their essence. Decisions that once terrified now come with quiet certainty. Saying no, stepping away, choosing solitude, these are no longer acts of courage alone, they are natural extensions of the self that has reclaimed its authority. And with each choice, each act of self-preservation, the empath solidifies the understanding that life is no longer a battlefield to survive, but a canvas to inhabit, consciously, with awareness and compassion. This stage is also where the empath experiences the profound beauty of discernment. You can see people as they are, without illusions, without wishing them to be different. You can recognize manipulation at its subtle onset, and instead of absorbing it, you respond with awareness and poise. You can feel deeply, connect fully, love generously, all while protecting the integrity of your heart. The world may still contain shadows, but your soul moves through it with a clarity and steadiness that was once unimaginable. Your sensitivity is no longer a burden, it is a guide, a lens, a source of strength. And in this stage, empathy transforms into a conscious art. The capacity to understand, to feel, to care, is paired with wisdom and boundaries. You no longer take on what is not yours, yet your heart remains open to those who are worthy of connection. Compassion becomes intentional rather than automatic. Love becomes deliberate rather than draining. Presence becomes a gift, both to yourself and to others. You feel the profound truth that your energy is sacred, and you are the steward of it. This is the apex of the empath's journey, the place where survival evolves into mastery. The heart that once feared its own depth now embraces it fully. The mind that once doubted its own instincts now trusts them unconditionally. And the spirit that once hid in shadows now shines quietly, steadily, without seeking validation, without needing permission. Jung would say this is individuation, the full integration of the self. But for the empath who has endured narcissistic abuse, this stage is something more intimate and deeply human. It is the reclamation of life, of freedom, of selfhood. It is the awakening to the truth that being sensitive does not make you weak, that being compassionate does not make you vulnerable, and that being alive means existing fully, authentically, and unapologetically. In this final stage, the empath also experiences a profound reconnection with creativity, joy, and purpose. Energy once consumed by survival is now available for expression, for exploration, for building a life that feels aligned with the self. Every act of creation, writing, art, movement, connection, becomes a sacred marker of autonomy and authenticity. Every moment of laughter, curiosity, and wonder becomes proof that the empath has reclaimed not only their life, but the right to exist fully and freely in it. Emotional mastery emerges as well. You can feel without fear, love without losing yourself, and engage without being drained. The storm of past abuse no longer controls your inner world. You can experience joy without guilt, confidence without arrogance, and empathy without overextension. The heart that once absorbed chaos now radiates clarity, strength, and grounded presence. You are no longer at the mercy of others' emotions, you are the guardian of your own. This is also a stage of profound self-compassion. You no longer blame yourself for what happened. You no longer apologize for your sensitivity or your depth of feeling. You honor the courage it took to endure, the resilience it took to survive, and the wisdom it took to reclaim yourself. The affirmations you repeat, I am enough, I am worthy, I am safe, I am whole, are no longer abstract words but lived truths that steady the heart and soothe the soul. Relationships transform as well. The empath now naturally attracts those who resonate with their authenticity. Those who respect boundaries, honor feelings, and value presence are drawn to you effortlessly. Those who seek to control, manipulate, or exploit find no foothold. And in this, the empath finally experiences what it means to connect without compromise, to love without fear, and to be fully seen without losing the self in the process. Spiritually, the empath begins to inhabit a place of inner freedom that few ever reach. Sensitivity is no longer a liability, it is a bridge. Compassion is no longer an obligation, it is a choice. Awareness is no longer anxiety, it is clarity. You move through the world with a quiet power, one that does not need validation, does not seek attention, and does not fear the darkness. You are whole, even in imperfection. You are strong, even in vulnerability. You are free, even in a world that may still be challenging. And finally, in this culmination, the empath experiences the rare and profound gift of inner peace. Not the absence of challenge, not the absence of pain, not the absence of struggle, but the presence of self. The heart is aligned, the mind is clear, the spirit is awake. You have integrated shadow and light, vulnerability and strength, sensitivity and discernment. You have reclaimed the pieces of yourself that were lost, and in doing so, you have learned the ultimate truth. Your sensitivity is your power, your compassion is your wisdom, your survival is your mastery. The empath who reaches this stage walks forward with courage, grace, and quiet authority. Life is no longer something to endure, but something to live fully, consciously, and with awareness. Each breath, each heartbeat, each choice is a declaration of presence and sovereignty. And in this, the empath finally experiences what Carl Jung spoke of in Individuation, the full integration of the self, the unification of shadow and light, the realization of wholeness, and the awakening to a life lived in alignment with the deepest truth of who they are. You have survived. You have reclaimed. You have integrated. You have risen. The storm has passed, and though the world will always have its challenges, your heart now beats with a clarity, strength, and resilience that cannot be shaken. You are not just an empath. You are an awakened, empowered, whole human being, capable of love, clarity, and freedom like never before. From the moment you became aware of the world around you, you may have noticed that life feels different, that people's emotions, moods, and unspoken tensions seem to press against you in ways others do not experience, that even when a room is full of strangers, you sense the undercurrents, the hidden stories, the invisible currents that shape the energy around you, and while this awareness is a gift, it can also feel like a burden. A constant weight that the world does not understand or respect. You may have tried to explain your experiences, only to be met with confusion or dismissal, told that you are too sensitive, too reactive, too much, and in those moments, you may have begun to question yourself, to wonder if feeling so deeply is a flaw, if noticing what others overlook is a mistake, if carrying the emotions of others is something you must suppress to survive. The truth is, none of this is wrong. Your sensitivity is not a defect, it is the very thing that allows you to perceive life at depth, to notice the subtleties, the nuances, the energies that most people cannot see. For a long time, you may have felt alone with this perception, carrying an invisible load, observing patterns and feelings that others cannot perceive, and struggling to find anyone who truly understands. You may have sensed tension before arguments arise, noticed sadness that was hidden behind smiles, or felt the anxiety of strangers as though it were your own. These experiences can leave you exhausted, and yet they are also evidence of your extraordinary awareness, evidence that you navigate life with a depth that few can match, evidence that your perception is attuned to layers of existence that remain invisible to most. Life often teaches lessons through contrast, and for someone who feels deeply, those lessons can be relentless. You may have found yourself giving more than you receive, absorbing more than you should, caring more than is returned, and yet when you pause to honor your own needs, others may misunderstand you, criticize you, or label you as selfish. The tension between your natural inclination to feel and care, and the world's inability to recognize that inclination as a gift, can create profound internal conflict, a sense of being out of step with a society that rewards surface-level awareness and visible action over emotional insight. Carl Jung described the unconscious as the part of the human mind that contains what is hidden, denied, or unrecognized, and for someone with heightened sensitivity, the unconscious is a constant presence, not just your own, but that of everyone you interact with. You sense the shadows, the unspoken fears, the hidden desires, and the buried pain that others do not acknowledge. It can feel like carrying multiple realities at once, balancing your own emotions while simultaneously absorbing fragments of everyone else's, and it is this depth that often leads to misunderstanding. People may see your reactions as overreactions, your caring as interference, or your awareness as a burden, when in reality, you are simply tuned into the invisible threads that connect life together. Early experiences shape this awareness. You may have learned to mask your sensitivity to fit in, to tone down your reactions, hide your intuition, or downplay your observations, in an effort to be accepted, to avoid criticism, or simply to survive. And while these strategies provide temporary relief, they also create distance from your authentic self, a subtle disconnection from the very depth that defines you, a tension between the world you navigate and the inner world that calls for recognition, integration, and self-understanding. The paradox of heightened sensitivity is that it is both a gift and a challenge. You feel more, notice more, understand more, yet the very quality that allows you to navigate life with such insight is also what exposes you to misunderstanding, judgment, and exhaustion. And over time, without awareness and care, the weight of this can feel overwhelming. The constant absorption of unspoken emotions, the unacknowledged insight, the relentless pressure of perceiving what others cannot. It can leave you questioning your own value, wondering if the depth you carry is a mistake or a flaw. Yet there is a deeper truth waiting to be realized. The sensitivity that others misunderstand is not a weakness. It is a bridge to clarity, insight, and connection, a lens that reveals hidden dynamics and unseen truths, a tool for perceiving life more fully than most. Jung would remind you that the unconscious contains both shadow and wisdom, and by learning to navigate this space consciously, you can transform misunderstanding into understanding, exhaustion into clarity, and isolation into empowerment. As you begin to recognize the patterns of giving, absorbing, and overextending, you may start to see the importance of boundaries, not as walls, but as structures that protect your energy while allowing your awareness to flourish, not as rejection of others, but as affirmation of yourself, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, you begin to reclaim your sense of self, your power, and your freedom. This is the beginning of understanding, the first step in a journey that will carry you through confusion, judgment, and exhaustion toward clarity, wholeness, and insight. It is the moment when the weight of being misunderstood begins to feel less like a burden and more like a call to awaken to your true capacity, to honor the depth you feel, the perceptions you hold, and the life you are meant to navigate with presence, awareness, and integrity. And so, the journey begins, not with the world's approval, but with your own recognition, your own acceptance, your own commitment to live fully in the truth of your sensitivity, knowing that it is not a flaw, not a liability, and not something to hide, but a rare and profound gift that can guide you to understanding, connection, and wholeness that most people will never experience. As an empath, your life has always been lived on multiple layers at once. You feel the surface reality, but also the currents beneath it, the invisible energies that shape every interaction. And while this awareness gives you incredible insight, it also leaves you vulnerable to exhaustion, confusion, and being misjudged. The world around you moves quickly, skimming the surface, while you are constantly absorbing the hidden emotions, the unspoken fears, the subtle shifts in tone and expression that others cannot detect. It can feel like carrying a secret weight that no one else notices, and often, that weight is misunderstood as weakness. From a young age, you may have noticed that your feelings were deeper, richer, and more complicated than those of the people around you, yet when you tried to explain it, you were told to stop feeling so much, to lighten up, to not be so sensitive. You may have learned to hide your reactions, to diminish your responses, or to apologize for the intensity of your emotions, not because you wanted to, but because the world rewarded people who could exist without feeling so much. And in doing so, you began to internalize the belief that your depth was somehow wrong, that it was a flaw rather than the extraordinary gift it truly is. Jung described the empathic experience as an interaction with the unconscious, not just your own, but that of everyone you encounter. You intuit the parts of people they themselves cannot face, the shame they hide, the guilt they deny, the sorrow they suppress. And this creates a tension within you. You are drawn into the lives of others without invitation, and yet, the world often interprets your sensitivity as overstepping, as being too involved, as a kind of emotional overreaction. The paradox is that your awareness is both your greatest strength and the reason others misjudge you, because depth can be frightening to those who are not used to it. In relationships, this dynamic becomes especially evident. You may have friends who rely on you for constant support, partners who take your intuition and your care for granted, colleagues who expect you to manage tensions without acknowledgement or gratitude. And as an empath, you naturally respond to these needs, absorbing energy, soothing emotions, and anticipating problems before they appear. But over time, this pattern can leave you depleted, and when you express your own needs, when you finally ask for space or recognition, others may react with confusion or even frustration. The misunderstanding is not accidental, it is structural, built into the way society values visible action over emotional awareness. Many empaths attempt to cope by withdrawing, masking their sensitivity, or trying to feel less. You may have tried this yourself, learning to tone down your reactions, to ignore subtle signals, to retreat from the depths that make life so vivid. And while these strategies can bring temporary relief, they also create a sense of disconnection from your true self. Jung would say that avoiding your depth is not a solution, it is a postponement of wholeness. The shadow you notice in others is mirrored in you, and the emotions you absorb are part of the tapestry of your own inner life. To live fully as an empath, you must learn to honor your sensitivity while protecting it. Energy management becomes central to survival. As someone who feels so much, you must become aware of what belongs to you and what belongs to others, learning to discern between genuine empathy and unconscious absorption. Saying no does not make you selfish, it preserves your vitality. Stepping back does not make you uncaring, it allows you to engage more fully when you choose to. This practice, though challenging, is what transforms your empathy from a source of overwhelm into a source of clarity, insight, and even joy. Yet the struggle to be understood continues. People may still misinterpret your kindness as weakness, your attentiveness as overinvolvement, your intuition as intrusion, and it can feel lonely to be so deeply connected to a world that cannot always meet you at your level. But the truth is that being misunderstood is not a reflection of your inadequacy. It is a reflection of how rare it is to feel so fully. Your gift of depth, your ability to sense the hidden, your capacity for empathy, these qualities make you extraordinary. And Jung would remind you that the path of the empath is not about fitting into a shallow world. It is about integrating your own depth and finding those who can resonate with it. Patterns repeat for many empaths. You may find yourself in relationships, work environments, or social circles that drain you, where your awareness is taken for granted, where your effort to understand and care is unreciprocated. Jung's teachings suggest that these patterns are opportunities for self-awareness, moments to practice discernment, to strengthen boundaries, and to recognize that your energy is sacred. By observing rather than reacting, by choosing where to engage, and by honoring your own needs first, you reclaim the power that others may have unintentionally exploited. And this reclamation is profound. Slowly, imperceptibly, you begin to feel more stable, more anchored in yourself. You realize that the world's inability to understand you does not diminish your worth. It simply marks the uniqueness of your perception. You begin to navigate life with intention, offering your empathy with clarity, reserving your energy for those who respect it, and protecting your inner life from unnecessary drain. You begin to see that being misunderstood is not a curse. It is a sign that your depth is a gift that the world has not yet learned to value. Ultimately, the journey of the empath is a journey toward wholeness. It is a journey toward understanding the shadow, the unconscious forces within yourself and others, the emotions that ripple through the world silently. It is a journey of learning when to absorb, when to step back, and when to honor your own energy above the expectations of others. And through this process, you begin to experience what Jung called individuation, the integration of your depth, your shadow, and your conscious self, the moment when your empathy becomes a bridge, rather than a burden, a source of insight, connection, and personal power. And in embracing this truth, you find clarity, peace, and a freedom that comes from knowing your sensitivity is not a weakness, but the very thing that allows you to connect to life more fully than most ever will. As an empath, life often feels like walking on a tightrope. One side is your own inner world, rich and sensitive, filled with intuition and subtle perception. The other side is the world around you, chaotic, loud, and often unaware of the currents you feel, and between the two, you constantly negotiate balance. Every interaction is a test of energy. Every relationship is a negotiation between giving and preserving. Every day, a lesson in discernment. And yet, even when you learn these lessons, the world still misunderstands you. You have likely experienced moments where your empathy was met with confusion, dismissal, or even judgment. Moments when people looked at you and saw too much, instead of seeing the gift of your depth. Times when your intuition about a situation or a person was ignored because others could not see the invisible patterns you sensed. And times when your caring heart was taken advantage of because your generosity was mistaken for weakness. These experiences can leave scars, but they also teach the subtle art of self-recognition. Carl Jung would say that empaths are naturally attuned to the shadow, the parts of life and people that are hidden, denied, or ignored. You sense what others cannot, you feel what others avoid, and you absorb the energy that others leave behind. This makes you extraordinarily sensitive to imbalance, extraordinarily perceptive to subtle truths, and extraordinarily prone to exhaustion if you do not protect yourself. Many empaths struggle with guilt when they finally set boundaries, because the world has taught them to believe that caring means always giving, always absorbing, always sacrificing. But true empathy does not require self-erasure. It requires presence and discernment. You may have spent years trying to fit in, trying to appear less sensitive, trying to act as if the depth of your awareness was normal, trying to hide the parts of yourself that make others uncomfortable. And in doing so, you may have lost touch with your own power. But the truth is, your sensitivity is not a flaw. It is a lens through which you perceive the world more clearly than most. A lens that reveals truths others cannot see. A lens that, when honored and managed, becomes your greatest strength. Think about the subtle ways this plays out in your life. You may notice the emotional tension in a meeting before anyone speaks. You may feel the unspoken pain of a friend long before they reveal it. You may sense dishonesty, avoidance, or hidden motives in people around you, and yet, when you act on this awareness, you may be dismissed or even criticized. The world often mistakes depth for drama, awareness for interference, sensitivity for weakness, and this is why empaths are so often misunderstood. Over time, the repeated pattern of being misjudged can create inner conflict. You may feel torn between your natural tendency to feel and help, and the need to protect yourself, between your desire to connect deeply and your need for boundaries, between your understanding of the hidden layers of life and the superficial ways the world operates. This tension can be exhausting, and many empaths develop coping mechanisms, withdrawing, masking their sensitivity, overanalyzing, or even numbing themselves emotionally. But while these strategies provide short-term relief, they do not solve the underlying issue. They simply create a disconnect from the very gift that defines you. Jung would advise that the path to wholeness for empaths is not to hide or suppress. It is to integrate. To face the shadow, to recognize the boundaries of what belongs to you and what belongs to others, to understand the difference between compassion and absorption, and to honor your own energy as fiercely as you honor the emotions of others. When you do this, the world's misunderstanding loses its power, the judgment no longer cuts as deeply, and your sensitivity transforms into wisdom, strength, and clarity. And there is another layer to this awakening. Many empaths eventually realize that their struggles with being misunderstood are not personal failures. They are reflections of society's inability to see life at depth. People are accustomed to superficial interactions, visible emotions, and easy solutions, and your subtle, intuitive awareness can feel threatening or uncomfortable to them. It is not your job to make the world understand you. It is your responsibility to understand yourself. To nurture your gifts, set boundaries, and live fully in your own depth. As this awareness grows, a profound shift occurs. You begin to choose carefully where to invest your energy, who to trust, who to help, and who to protect yourself from. You begin to see that not everyone is capable of receiving your empathy responsibly, and that is not your failure, but theirs. You also begin to embrace the paradox of being deeply connected yet independent, of feeling profoundly yet remaining intact, of caring endlessly without being consumed. In this state, misjudgment no longer wounds you as it once did. You understand that when someone cannot comprehend your sensitivity, it does not diminish your value. It only highlights the rarity of your perception, the uniqueness of your awareness, and the extraordinary power of your empathy. You begin to experience life in a way that others cannot, seeing hidden patterns, feeling invisible emotions, and sensing the subtle truths that shape human behavior. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, you cultivate freedom. Freedom from the need to explain yourself, freedom from the guilt of caring deeply, freedom from absorbing energy that is not yours, freedom to choose connection consciously, to give from a place of abundance rather than obligation, and freedom to honor your own emotional world as sacred. In this freedom, empathy stops being a burden, it becomes a bridge, a way to connect, guide, and illuminate without losing yourself. The journey is not linear. You will still encounter misunderstanding, moments when your depth is dismissed, your awareness is questioned, and your heart feels heavy. But each encounter becomes a lesson, a mirror, a confirmation of your path, a reminder that being misunderstood is not a flaw, but the signature of your extraordinary awareness. Jung's teachings illuminate this truth. Wholeness is not about fitting into a shallow world. It is about embracing the depths that define you, integrating your shadow, and claiming the life that honors your empathy fully. And when you reach this understanding, when you finally honor your sensitivity, protect your energy, and embrace your depth without apology, you realize something profound. Being misunderstood is not a tragedy, it is the natural consequence of being exceptional, of seeing the world in a way few ever can, of feeling so deeply that the ordinary cannot contain you, and yet, in this very misunderstanding, you find clarity, power, and ultimately, peace. As you move through life, the pattern of being misunderstood continues in subtle ways. It shows up in family gatherings where your insights into hidden tensions go unnoticed, in friendships where your attempts to understand and support are sometimes met with judgment, in workplaces where your awareness of unspoken dynamics is ignored or even criticized, and in love, where your intuition about needs, fears, and desires can be mistaken for overthinking or neediness. This repetition is not a reflection of your inadequacy, it is the world's lack of awareness, a reminder that sensitivity is often invisible to those who do not possess it. Many try to adapt, to blend in, to minimize the depth of what they feel, and for a time, this may seem like the only way to survive. You may have put on a mask, pretending your feelings are lighter than they are, trying to act normal in a world that does not honor emotional depth. And yet, even behind the mask, you are absorbing, sensing, and feeling more than anyone else in the room, which creates tension inside, a quiet restlessness, a subtle ache that never fully goes away. Jung would say that this is the call of the unconscious, the part of yourself yearning to be recognized, understood, and integrated, the part that knows that hiding your depth is hiding from your own wholeness. You are naturally drawn to the shadow, both within yourself and in the world around you, the unspoken pain, the hidden motives, the layers of fear and longing that others avoid, and because of this, you often feel responsible for what is not yours. You carry the energy of others without meaning to, you feel their anxiety, their sorrow, their frustration, and you may even try to fix it, to absorb it, to smooth it over, believing that this is part of what it means to be kind, to care, to be aware. Yet, in doing so, you risk losing touch with your own center, with the very essence of who you are. The process of becoming understood, or more accurately, understanding yourself, begins with boundaries. These are not walls to shut out the world, they are lines drawn with clarity and love, lines that protect your energy while allowing your sensitivity to flourish, lines that allow you to give consciously, rather than compulsively, lines that teach others how to honor you without diminishing your gift. Setting boundaries may feel uncomfortable at first, you may feel guilty, selfish, or even afraid that others will reject you, but in reality, boundaries are the key to turning awareness from a source of exhaustion into a source of strength and insight. Another challenge is learning to distinguish between what is yours and what belongs to others. The emotions you sense are not always your own, sometimes they are reflections, projections, or the unconscious burdens of those around you, and learning to identify these subtle differences is crucial. Jung would say that this discernment is part of individuation, the process of integrating your conscious awareness with the unconscious, understanding where your sensitivity ends and another's begins, and embracing your unique perspective without being consumed by it. It is common to experience a heightened sense of responsibility, the sense that if you do not feel, absorb, or fix, the world will fall apart, and while this is a sign of your caring nature, it can also be a trap. True connection does not require self-sacrifice to the point of depletion. It requires awareness, presence, and the ability to give without losing yourself. By observing patterns, honoring boundaries, and practicing conscious detachment when necessary, you reclaim the power of your gift. You learn that helping others does not mean being consumed by them. It means offering your insight and care in a way that preserves your own energy and integrity. The isolation that often comes with being misunderstood can be profound. You may feel like no one truly sees you, like the world does not understand the depth of your emotions, the clarity of your intuition, or the subtlety of your perception, and these feelings can be heavy, even lonely. Yet within this isolation lies the opportunity for self-discovery. Jung would remind you that solitude is not the absence of connection, it is the space in which you come to know yourself fully, the space where you integrate your shadow, where you recognize your strengths, your limitations, and the unique gift of your sensitivity. Over time, as you practice self-recognition, boundaries, and discernment, you begin to transform misunderstanding into clarity, pain into wisdom, confusion into insight. You begin to navigate life with intention, choosing where to invest your energy, understanding when to absorb and when to step back, giving your empathy consciously rather than compulsively, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, reclaiming your life from the fatigue, guilt, and misunderstanding that once defined it. And in this process, a profound truth emerges. Being misunderstood does not diminish your value. It highlights your uniqueness, your capacity for depth, your courage to feel what others cannot, and your ability to connect to the hidden currents of life that most people never notice. Jung called this integration, the harmonizing of conscious and unconscious awareness. And for someone who feels deeply, it is the path to wholeness. As you continue on this journey, you begin to recognize that sensitivity is not a burden, it is a bridge, a way to connect to others with insight, care, and compassion without losing yourself in the process. A way to bring light to places that are often unseen, to feel deeply without being consumed, and to live fully while honoring the boundaries that preserve your energy and clarity. And slowly, gently, you begin to feel what it is to live empowered, not someone who hides or apologizes for depth, not someone who absorbs endlessly without discernment, but someone who sees, feels, understands, and chooses consciously, someone who knows that being misunderstood is not a failure, but a sign of extraordinary perception, a mark of a gift that the world has not yet learned to value. As you continue to move through life, a quiet transformation begins. The constant weight of feeling so deeply does not vanish, but it changes. It becomes lighter, more intentional, more aligned with who you truly are. You begin to notice patterns that once drained you and realize that you do not have to absorb everything, that not all pain is yours to carry, and that caring does not require losing yourself. This awareness is subtle at first, a gentle pull toward clarity, a soft recognition that your energy is yours to protect and nurture. With time, you begin to cultivate boundaries that feel natural rather than restrictive. Saying no longer carries guilt, stepping back no longer feels like failure, and choosing to preserve your energy is no longer selfish. You begin to understand that protecting yourself is the foundation of your ability to connect meaningfully. You give when it is aligned with your strength, you listen when it is sustainable, and you care with full presence without being consumed. This shift is gradual, almost imperceptible, but profound, and the freedom it brings is undeniable. This process also brings a deeper understanding of the world around you. You begin to see that misunderstanding is rarely personal, that others cannot always recognize depth, intuition, and sensitivity, and that their reactions are reflections of their own awareness, limitations, and fears. You no longer carry the weight of their judgment as if it defines you. Instead, you observe, you respond consciously, and you continue to honor your own perception. The clarity that emerges from this is a quiet power, a sense of authority over your own experience that no one else can take away. Love transforms as well. The way you connect with others shifts from exhaustion to alignment. You notice who resonates with your depth and who does not, who appreciates your insight and who misreads your sensitivity, and you begin to invest in relationships that honor your energy rather than deplete it. Emotional intimacy becomes a choice, not a trap. Connection becomes meaningful rather than obligatory, and giving becomes an act of empowerment rather than self-erasure. This is not a change imposed by the world, it is a change born from understanding yourself. Jung would call this the integration of consciousness and the unconscious, the coming together of depth and clarity, shadow and awareness. You begin to see yourself as whole. Your sensitivity, intuition, and insight are not liabilities but gifts, parts of a unique perception that allows you to navigate the unseen layers of human experience. You no longer shrink to fit a shallow world. Instead, you inhabit your depth fully, confidently, and compassionately. You also learn that freedom does not come from avoiding the world, it comes from moving through it consciously. You engage, you feel, you care, but you do so on your own terms. You recognize that your energy is precious and finite, that it cannot be spent unconsciously, and that the value of your gift lies in discernment as much as in compassion. In this awareness, misunderstandings lose their sting, the judgments of others no longer wound, and your heart opens to the fullness of experience without being burdened by it. There is a quiet joy in this realization, a serenity that comes from knowing you are not broken, not too much, not flawed. That sensitivity is your lens to see the unseen, to feel the invisible, and to connect deeply with what matters. You begin to understand that being misunderstood is not a failure, it is the natural consequence of seeing more, feeling more, and caring more than most. It is a mark of awareness, depth, and rare perception. As you embrace this truth, you find alignment with life itself. The shadows that once weighed you down become guides, the emotions that once overwhelmed you become teachers, the boundaries that once felt restrictive become protective structures that allow your light to shine. You begin to live fully, giving, feeling, and perceiving without losing your center. Every choice becomes deliberate, every act of care becomes a conscious offering, and every connection is measured by the respect it affords your energy and depth. Ultimately, the journey ends not in perfection but in integration. You are whole in a way the world may not fully understand, yet you are free, empowered, and profoundly connected to the invisible currents of life. The sensitivity that once felt like a burden is now a bridge, a tool of insight, compassion, and understanding, a gift that allows you to see the truths others miss, to feel the pain others overlook, and to live with clarity, courage, and grace. And in this final realization, you are no longer defined by misunderstanding, you are defined by your depth, your insight, your ability to feel fully while remaining intact, and the quiet, unwavering knowledge that your perception, your sensitivity, and your presence are invaluable. You have moved from confusion to clarity, from exhaustion to empowerment, from being misunderstood to being fully known, at least by yourself, and in that knowing, you discover freedom, purpose, and the profound beauty of living deeply in a world that often cannot see. You know that feeling, when you step into a room and even before anyone speaks, you already know the atmosphere has shifted. The air feels thicker, like it's carrying invisible weight. A friend forces a smile, but you can sense the ache hidden behind it. A stranger's voice trembles, and without meaning to, your chest trembles with them. Someone sits quietly in the corner, and though they say nothing, you can feel their loneliness pulsing like an echo in your bones. Others glance past, too busy, too distracted to notice, but you cannot ignore it. You never could. This is what it means to walk through the world as an empath. To carry a heart that is wide open, a body that absorbs the unspoken, and a spirit that cannot stop reaching out even when it hurts. Most people don't see this. They think you are simply kind, maybe a little sensitive, maybe too emotional. What they don't see is that every day you live with a second layer of reality, one that weighs on you even when your own life seems calm. The burden of it is quiet but constant. It begins early, long before you could name it. Maybe as a child you were the one who noticed the shift in your parents' voices before an argument began. You felt the storm long before the thunder. Maybe you were the one who held back your own tears so you could soothe someone else's. Or the one who tried to bring laughter to lighten the heaviness around you. Slowly, without realizing, you learned to put your own needs second. You learned that to keep peace, you had to carry what no one else would. And so you grew into someone who sees what others miss. Someone who notices the fracture in another person's smile, who hears the truth in silence, who senses what lingers in the spaces between words. But what no one told you is that such awareness comes at a cost. Because while you are reading others, who is reading you? While you are carrying everyone's burdens, who is helping you lay yours down? This is where the empath's journey becomes heavy. You go through life pouring from yourself endlessly, often without realizing that your own well is running dry. Friends call you because you listen so deeply. Strangers feel safe unloading their troubles because they sense your compassion. Even people who have never earned your trust often come to you, because your heart is open in a way they cannot explain. And while you give, while you comfort, while you absorb, you quietly fade. You become exhausted but cannot name why. You feel heavy but cannot tell where the heaviness begins. Carl Jung once wrote about the shadow, the unseen part of ourselves that we tried to hide or deny. For empaths, the shadow is not about cruelty or coldness. It is the exhaustion you try to ignore. It is the frustration you swallow when no one notices your sacrifices. It is the silent anger that whispers in the back of your mind, "Why is it always me?" But instead of listening, you silence that voice. You tell yourself it is selfish to feel this way. You keep giving, keep absorbing, keep carrying. And slowly, the shadow grows heavier, not because you are weak, but because you were never taught how to set it down. Here lies the hidden truth. Sensitivity is not your weakness. It was never meant to break you. It is your gift, your compass, your way of seeing beauty in places others overlook. The problem is not that you feel too much, it is that you have been taught to carry what is not yours. You mistake absorbing pain for helping, when in reality, you are only filling yourself with weight that was never meant to live inside you. So the journey of the empath is not about shutting down your heart, not about becoming harder or colder. It is about finally learning where you end and where someone else begins. It is about recognizing that every emotion you pick up is not an invitation to hold it forever. It is about seeing that compassion does not mean self-erasure. Imagine for a moment a life where you still notice the sadness in someone's eyes, but instead of drowning in it, you offer kindness and let it pass through you. Imagine hearing someone's anger but not letting it linger in your chest. Imagine giving comfort without losing yourself in the process. This is not selfishness. This is balance. And balance is the beginning of peace. And so the first step is recognition. To finally admit to yourself that the heaviness you feel is not always your own. That many of the emotions you wrestle with were never born in your heart. That much of the sorrow you carry belongs to others, not to you. Once you see this clearly, something shifts. You begin to separate the voices in your head. You begin to ask, if this sadness is theirs, then who am I without it? If this weight was never mine, then what does my own soul truly feel? This is where your journey begins. Not in carrying more, not in giving endlessly, but in discovering the self that has been buried beneath the noise of others. The self that is not defined by someone else's mood. The self that does not exist only to soothe or to fix. The self that longs quietly but firmly for peace. And it is here, in this pause, in this moment of clarity, that you finally begin to see your sensitivity is not a curse. It is a doorway. And it can lead you somewhere new, if you dare to step through. When you begin to notice how much of your heaviness is borrowed, something inside you stirs. At first it feels strange, even unsettling, to imagine that not every sadness in your heart is truly yours. You may feel guilty, as if by letting go you are abandoning people who rely on you. You may wonder, if I stop carrying this, will they still feel cared for? And this is where the old patterns try to pull you back. Because for so long, you have been told, sometimes directly, sometimes silently, that your worth is in your giving. That your softness only matters when it eases someone else's pain. But here is the truth. Love is not measured by how much you sacrifice. Compassion is not proven by how deeply you allow yourself to bleed. Real compassion has space for you too. And part of your journey is unlearning the belief that you are only valuable when you are pouring yourself empty. This is the hard part for many empaths. Because stepping back feels unnatural. Saying no feels cruel. Taking time for yourself feels like abandonment. Yet every time you ignore your own needs, you become further removed from who you are. And slowly, the kindness you give begins to come not from abundance, but from depletion. It is like pouring water from a cracked jar, watching yourself run dry while hoping no one notices how much you are losing. Carl Jung wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. For you, that means peeling away the layers of expectation that have covered your spirit. It means realizing that you are not simply a mirror for the suffering around you, you are a soul with its own rhythm, its own desires, its own voice. And if you never stop to listen to that voice, you will spend your life speaking only in the echoes of others. So how do you begin to listen? The first step is silence. Not the silence of suppression, but the silence of space. Imagine stepping outside, far from the noise of others, and allowing yourself to simply feel what remains. At first it may be confusing. You may ask yourself, is this feeling mine, or did I pick it up from someone else? It may take time, because your heart has been crowded for years. But slowly, gently, you begin to notice that underneath the layers of borrowed emotions, there is something steady. A quiet pulse that belongs only to you. That is your center. That is your true self calling you home. Boundaries are the next step, and for an empath, boundaries can feel like betrayal. But they are not walls to keep love out. They are rivers that allow your love to flow without flooding your soul. A boundary is saying, I can listen, but I cannot carry this for you. A boundary is saying, I care, but I need time to rest. A boundary is saying, I am here, but I am not your vessel. At first, these words may feel harsh. You may feel guilt pressing against your chest like a stone. But with practice, you realize that every boundary is also an act of love, for yourself, and for others too. Because when you are not drowning, your compassion flows more freely. When you are not exhausted, your kindness carries more strength. Think of it like breathing. If you were trapped in a room with no air, you could not help anyone else. You would suffocate before you could offer a hand. Boundaries are the air you breathe. They keep you alive, so your presence can remain steady, clear, and real. Without them, you are only a shadow of yourself, offering fragments instead of wholeness. As you walk deeper into this journey, you begin to notice how differently the world feels when you are not absorbing everything. The same crowded room that once overwhelmed you now becomes manageable. You still sense the emotions, but they no longer take root in your chest. You begin to feel them flow through you instead of into you. And in this flow, there is freedom. You realize you can love someone without holding their sorrow. You can care deeply without being consumed. You can offer light without burning yourself out. This is the quiet transformation that many empaths never reach, because they are too busy proving their love through sacrifice. But when you finally see it, when you finally taste the peace of holding space without carrying weight, something inside you begins to heal. You realize that your gift was never meant to crush you. It was meant to show you the hidden beauty of human connection, without demanding your destruction in return. And so the path unfolds, slowly, gently, like a stream cutting through stone. Each day you learn to release a little more of what does not belong to you. Each day you notice the difference between your own feelings and the borrowed storms of others. Each day you reclaim another piece of yourself. And with each piece, your peace grows. Because the truth is, peace for the empath is not found in escaping the world. It is found in learning how to remain open without being broken. It is found in remembering that your gift is not in how much you absorb, but in how deeply you see. And when you see without drowning, you finally discover that being an empath is not just a burden, it is a profound, rare, and sacred way of moving through this demanding world. There comes a point on the empath's path where the weight becomes unbearable. It is not sudden. It creeps in quietly, like fog rolling over a familiar landscape, until one day you wake up and realize you cannot tell where your emotions end and someone else's begin. You notice that your shoulders ache even when you have done no heavy lifting. Your mind feels crowded even when you are alone. Your chest tightens as if bracing for storms that never come. And you begin to wonder, is this simply who I am, or is there another way to live? This is the breaking point, and though it feels painful, it is not your undoing. It is your threshold. Because every journey of transformation begins with a moment of reckoning. A moment when you realize that continuing as you have always done will only hollow you out further. You cannot keep saying yes when every cell in your body is begging for rest. You cannot keep silencing your own heart just to carry the noise of others. You cannot keep mistaking depletion for love. And though part of you resists, another part begins to whisper, enough. The world has always praised you for your selflessness, for your ability to hold space, for your uncanny way of understanding. But what the world rarely tells you is that empathy without boundaries is self-abandonment. Jung wrote that the soul longs for wholeness, not perfection. And for you, wholeness cannot exist until you begin to weave yourself back into the fabric of your own life. Until you stop treating your needs as an afterthought and begin honoring them as sacred. This is where the journey deepens. You begin to ask questions you have never dared to ask. Who am I apart from the roles I play in other people's lives? Who am I when I am not the healer, the listener, the peacemaker? Who am I when I stop carrying what is not mine? These questions feel both liberating and terrifying, because for so long your identity has been tied to how much you give. Without that, you fear you might vanish. But the truth is, you will not vanish. You will emerge. To find yourself, you must begin to create space. Space from the constant noise, space from the endless requests, space from the invisible threads tugging at your heart. At first this feels unnatural. You are so used to rushing in, to soothing, to absorbing. Stepping back feels like cruelty. But slowly you discover that space is not absence. It is presence. Presence with yourself, with your own inner landscape, with the voice that has been buried under everyone else's pain. In the silence, you begin to notice your own patterns. You realize how often you take responsibility for what was never yours. You notice how quickly you apologize even when you have done nothing wrong. You see how much of your energy is spent anticipating the emotions of others, as if by doing so you could prevent them from ever feeling pain. And when you see this clearly, you also begin to see the truth. You were never meant to protect the world from suffering. You were only meant to meet the world with compassion, not to carry it on your back. This is where the work of shadow begins. Jung described the shadow as the parts of ourselves we avoid, but for you, the shadow is not darkness in the usual sense. It is your unspoken needs, your hidden desires, your silenced anger, your deep exhaustion. For years, you have shoved these parts aside because they felt selfish or unkind. But the shadow never disappears, it waits. It waits for you to finally turn toward it, to acknowledge that even your most uncomfortable feelings are messengers. Anger is telling you where your boundaries have been crossed. Exhaustion is telling you where you have overgiven. Resentment is telling you where you have betrayed yourself. These are not signs of failure. They are signals pointing you back to balance. When you finally listen, something begins to shift. You realize that honoring your needs is not the opposite of love, it is the foundation of it. Because without honoring yourself, every act of compassion becomes laced with bitterness. Without honoring yourself, every yes carries the quiet resentment of another self-betrayal. But when you begin to honor yourself, love flows more purely. It is no longer sacrifice. It is no longer depletion. It is a steady flame, warm and enduring, instead of a wildfire burning you out. Boundaries, once terrifying, begin to feel like freedom. You discover that saying no does not end connection, it strengthens it. Because when you are not pretending, when you are not suppressing, when you are not overextending, your presence becomes more genuine. People may resist at first, especially those who have grown accustomed to your endless giving. They may question, they may push, they may accuse. But in time, those who truly care for you will adjust. They will learn to meet you, not just take from you. And those who cannot adjust were never truly connected to you. They were only connected to what you gave them. As you walk further down this path, you begin to notice a new kind of peace entering your life. It is subtle at first. A morning where you wake and your chest feels lighter. An evening where you realize you are not carrying anyone else's anger. A moment of laughter that feels untainted by guilt. These are the small markers of change, the whispers of balance returning. And as they accumulate, you begin to realize that peace is not something distant or unattainable. It has been waiting within you all along, hidden beneath the weight you carried. And then something beautiful happens. You begin to see your gift differently. Empathy is no longer a cage. It is no longer a curse that drains you. It becomes a lens, a way of seeing the hidden beauty in others, a way of connecting deeply without losing yourself. You notice the light in people as vividly as you once noticed their pain. You begin to sense joy, hope, resilience with the same clarity you once sensed sorrow. And this shifts everything. Because now your gift does not drown you, it uplifts you. You are no longer a sponge, soaking in the world until you are heavy. You are a mirror, reflecting truth back to those who need it. You are a lantern, shining light without dimming your own flame. You are still an empath, still sensitive, still open, but now you are whole. And in that wholeness, peace is no longer just a dream. It is your way of being. This is the empath's journey. Not a journey of escape, not a journey of shutting down, but a journey of remembering. Remembering that you are not here to carry everything. Remembering that you are not here to abandon yourself. Remembering that your gift is not in suffering, but in seeing. And when you remember this fully, when you embody it with every breath, you finally find what you have been searching for all along, peace in a demanding world. As the empath steps further into this awakening, the journey begins to feel less like survival and more like a reclamation. For years, life was a series of reactions, absorbing, adjusting, softening edges, bending to fit the moods of others. Now, slowly but surely, it begins to shift. No longer a leaf carried by every wind, you start to feel like a tree, rooted, steady, unshaken. And though the winds still blow, though the noise of the world still rages, you notice something profound. You do not collapse with every storm. You bend, you sway, but you remain whole. This realization is not just mental. It lives in the body. You begin to notice how your breath changes when you are no longer weighed down. The shallow, anxious breaths that once governed your days are replaced with a deeper rhythm. You catch yourself inhaling without fear, exhaling without guilt. Your nervous system, once perpetually on high alert, begins to soften. This is not coincidence. It is your spirit recalibrating, your body remembering safety after years of carrying danger that was never yours. From here, another layer of transformation unfolds. You begin to discover the power of choice, something that once seemed impossible. Before, you believed empathy meant always saying yes, always entering into the storm of others. But now you see differently. You realize that empathy is not obligation. It is a capacity. And like all capacities, it can be directed with wisdom. You can choose where to place your heart, where to extend your energy, where to stand firm. This is not coldness. This is sovereignty. Jung wrote that wholeness is the integration of opposites. For you, this means learning that love and boundary are not enemies. Sensitivity and strength are not contradictions. You can feel deeply and still remain steady. You can give generously and still protect yourself. You can open your heart without losing your ground. This integration is the true alchemy of your journey, the moment where the extremes dissolve and balance is born. In daily life, this integration begins to show itself in subtle ways. You notice when someone's words carry manipulation, where before you would have swallowed them without question. You sense when guilt is being used as a leash, and for the first time, you do not tighten it around your own neck. You recognize when an environment drains you, and instead of enduring, you choose to leave. Each small choice affirms that you are no longer abandoning yourself. Each decision becomes a brick in the foundation of your peace. And as this foundation grows, so does your vision. Empathy, when no longer distorted by self-betrayal, becomes clarity. You begin to see not only the pain in others, but also the unspoken truths they cannot name. You see the masks they wear, the armor they carry, the fear behind their anger, the longing beneath their bravado. But now, you do not confuse these truths with your responsibility. You see them with compassion, but you no longer drown in them. You understand that compassion is not about dissolving into another's suffering, it is about holding space without disappearing yourself. This shift transforms your relationships. Those who once lean on you without limit may grow restless, but those who truly value you will meet you with new respect. They will begin to see that your boundaries do not diminish your love, they sharpen it. Your no makes your yes more meaningful. Your refusal to carry what is not yours creates room for authentic connection. And as your relationships reshape, you notice something you never felt before. You feel lighter, freer, more yourself than you ever thought possible. But peace is not found only in relationships. It begins to seep into every corner of your life. You notice it in solitude. Moments once filled with loneliness now feel nourishing. You notice it in your work, where once you carried the emotional burdens of colleagues, now you hold your center and conserve your strength. You notice it in your inner dialogue, where once you scolded yourself for not doing enough, now you speak gently, reminding yourself that rest is not weakness but wisdom. And then comes the deeper gift. In the stillness you now allow, your creativity awakens. For so long, your energy was consumed by managing others. With that weight lifted, your imagination begins to flourish. Ideas that once felt buried begin to surface. You find yourself drawn to create, to write, to paint, to build, to move, to sing. The soul, once suffocated by exhaustion, begins to breathe, and with that breath, your natural gifts pour forth. This is the part no one tells you about, that when empaths reclaim their boundaries, they do not lose their gift. They amplify it. They redirect it into creation instead of depletion. And in this creation, you discover joy again. Real joy. Not borrowed joy, not joy through someone else's smile, but joy that rises from within. A sunrise that fills you with awe. A piece of music that vibrates through your body. A quiet evening where you feel, perhaps for the first time in years, completely whole. These are not small moments. They are revelations. They remind you that peace is not the absence of feeling. Peace is the presence of alignment. This is the full circle of the empath's journey. You began as a soul drowning in the currents of others, believing that this was your fate. You broke beneath the weight, but instead of staying broken, you chose to awaken. You faced the shadow, you learned the language of boundaries, you reclaimed the parts of yourself you once abandoned. And in doing so, you transformed empathy from a wound into a gift, from a burden into a power, from a curse into a calling. Now, as you stand rooted in your own being, you carry a different kind of strength. Not the brittle strength of walls, but the fluid strength of rivers. Not the cold strength of distance, but the warm strength of presence. You do not need to shut down to protect yourself. You do not need to carry to prove your love. You live now in balance, and from that balance, peace flows into every part of your life. This peace is not fragile. It does not vanish with the chaos of the world. It endures because it lives within you. And once you have tasted it, once you have built it, once you have embodied it, you realize this is what you were searching for all along. Not to escape your sensitivity, but to reclaim it as strength. Not to erase your empathy, but to let it shine without destroying you. This is the journey. This is the gift. This is the moment you finally become whole. There comes a moment on this path where you realize you are no longer the same person who once carried the entire weight of the world on trembling shoulders. The empath who once dissolved into every room, who lived through the moods of others, who mistook self-sacrifice for love, begins to fade like a shadow at dawn. In their place rises someone new, someone familiar yet different, someone who has walked through fire and learned not only to survive it, but to carry light from its flames. This transformation does not happen overnight. It is not the story of a sudden awakening, but of countless small moments stitched together like threads in a tapestry. The day you said no and did not collapse into guilt. The afternoon you walked away from someone who drained you, even though your heart ached to stay. The evening you allowed yourself to rest without earning it first. The morning you realized that peace, real peace, does not need justification. These quiet victories, invisible to the outside world, are what build the new life of an empath who has finally learned to choose themselves. And yet, choosing yourself as an empath feels radical, almost rebellious. Because the world has conditioned you to believe that your worth comes from what you give, how much you absorb, how endlessly you bend. Breaking free from that illusion feels like breaking chains you never realized were shackled around your spirit. At first, the freedom feels uncomfortable, even frightening. You may hear the old voices in your head whispering that you are selfish, that you are abandoning others, that you are cold. But with time, those voices quiet. They lose their grip, because deep down you begin to feel something stronger than guilt. You begin to feel truth. And truth is liberating. It tells you that you were never meant to be a sponge for the world's pain. You were never meant to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. You were never meant to betray your own soul in order to be loved. Your sensitivity was never the problem. It was the lack of boundaries, the absence of understanding, the distortion of what empathy truly is. When this realization fully sinks in, something shifts forever. You no longer see your gift as a curse. You see it as power, but power guided by wisdom. This wisdom brings clarity about relationships. The empath who has awakened no longer tolerates being drained. You begin to notice patterns that once kept you trapped. The friend who only calls in crisis. The partner who relies on you for emotional labor but gives nothing in return. The colleague who uses your kindness as a ladder. Before, you would have endured it all, convincing yourself it was love, loyalty, or duty. Now you see it clearly for what it is, imbalance. And slowly, steadily, you begin to release what does not honor your spirit. At first, this pruning of relationships may leave you feeling bare, like a tree in winter. But in that stillness, something beautiful happens. Space opens. And into that space, new connections arrive, connections that are not built on your exhaustion, but on mutual respect. People who cherish your sensitivity instead of exploiting it. Friends who listen as deeply as you do. Partners who love you not because you carry their pain, but because you share their joy. This is the reward of boundaries, not loneliness, but alignment. Not emptiness, but nourishment. Beyond relationships, the empath's journey touches something even deeper, the rediscovery of the self. For so long, your identity was tangled in the needs of others. Without realizing it, you became a mirror, reflecting back the emotions of everyone around you. But when the mirror clears, when you finally separate your reflection from theirs, you encounter someone you may not have known in years, your true self. This self is not fragile, not invisible, not defined by constant sacrifice. This self has dreams, passions, desires, and a voice of its own. It is here that the empath's gift transforms into its highest form. Because empathy is not meant to erase you. It is meant to guide you into deeper connection with life. When balanced, it becomes vision. It allows you to see the world not only as it is, but as it could be. It helps you understand people not only in their masks, but in their essence. It gives you the ability to create bridges, to bring healing, to inspire hope. But now you share this gift from overflow, not from depletion. You give without emptying yourself. You shine without burning out. Carl Jung spoke often about individuation, the process of becoming whole by integrating every part of yourself, light and shadow, strength and vulnerability. For the empath, individuation is not about discarding sensitivity, but about weaving it into the fabric of a full self. The shadow is not the gift itself, but the distortion of it, the places where you lost yourself, the wounds of overgiving, the patterns of self-erasure. By facing these shadows, by acknowledging the pain of always carrying too much, you release their hold. And in that release, the light of your true gift shines unobstructed. As you walk further into this wholeness, life itself begins to change. The world feels different when you are no longer drowning in it. Nature speaks louder, the rustle of leaves feels alive, the sound of rain calms you in ways it never did before, the silence of solitude feels rich instead of empty. Creativity blossoms, words flow, colors speak, melodies rise, ideas spark. Energy that was once consumed by constant emotional labor now returns to you, fueling your purpose, your passions, your unique way of moving through the world. And perhaps the most beautiful shift of all is joy. Real joy. Not fleeting moments borrowed from others, not temporary relief when everyone else is okay, but a deep well within you. Joy in stillness. Joy in presence. Joy in simply existing as yourself, without apology. This joy is not loud, not performative. It is quiet, steady, unshakable. It becomes the ground beneath your feet, the breath in your lungs, the warmth in your chest. And once you feel it, you realize that peace was never about escaping the world. It was about finding home within yourself. This is the empath's journey. From burden to balance. From erasure to selfhood. From drowning to peace. You are not here to carry the world. You are here to walk in it with open eyes, open heart, and steady ground. You are here to share your gift without losing yourself, to love without abandoning yourself, to feel without breaking yourself. This is the path. This is the transformation. This is the freedom that waits on the other side of choosing yourself. And as you stand here now, on this new ground, you may finally whisper the words you have waited a lifetime to say. I am sensitive, and I am strong. I am open, and I am whole. I am an empath, and I am free. You have carried so much for so long, and most of it was never yours to carry. From the earliest days you can remember, you felt the pain in the room before anyone spoke of it. You noticed the unspoken tension between your parents, the sadness behind your friend's smile, the quiet frustration in your teacher's voice. You felt all of it as if it belonged to you. While other children ran free, you were already holding invisible weights. You didn't have words for it then, but you knew one thing: you were different. As you grew older, this difference became both a blessing and a curse. People trusted you, often without knowing why. They poured their secrets into your open heart, drawn to your compassion like moths to a flame. And you carried their stories with tenderness, because you could not bear to see anyone feel alone. But what no one saw was what it cost you. The sleepless nights replaying conversations in your head. The way you absorbed people's anger like it was your fault. The way you sacrificed your own peace just to give someone else a moment of relief. Empaths are the silent healers of this world. But being one often means you are praised for your kindness while quietly drowning in your own exhaustion. And somewhere along the way, you began to believe that this was your role. That your purpose was to be the strong one, the understanding one, the one who holds it all together. And when you dared to want something for yourself, the guilt crept in, whispering that you were selfish, that you were abandoning others. But here is the truth you have long needed to hear. It is not selfish to choose yourself. It is survival. Carl Jung once wrote that we do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. For empaths, that darkness is the shadow of self-abandonment. The part of you that constantly says yes when your soul is screaming no. The part of you that silences your needs so others will not feel discomfort. The part of you that mistakes being needed for being loved. Until this shadow is faced, you will keep repeating this cycle of overgiving, overcaring, over-sacrificing, and quietly breaking inside. But when an empath awakens, everything changes. It begins slowly, almost like a whisper. You start to notice the ways you betray yourself. You notice the heaviness in your body after saying yes when you wanted to say no. You notice how drained you feel around certain people who never give back what you offer. You notice the quiet grief of realizing you have spent years putting yourself last. And though it hurts to see it, this awareness is the first step toward freedom. Choosing yourself does not mean closing your heart. It means learning how to love without losing yourself. It means understanding that boundaries are not walls, they are doors. Doors that allow you to decide who enters your life, how long they stay, and how much access they have to your energy. At first, boundaries feel terrifying. You worry people will leave. You fear they will call you selfish, or worse, unloving. And some people might. Because when you stop playing the role of endless giver, it forces them to face their own patterns. But those who truly value you will stay. They will learn to respect you in a new way. They will see that your love is still there, but it is healthier, steadier, and more real than before. As you learn to choose yourself, something else begins to happen. You meet parts of yourself you had buried for years. Jung called this the shadow, but really it is simply the parts of you that long for expression, but were silenced by fear. The anger you never voiced because you wanted to keep the peace. The desires you hid because you were told they were too much. The grief you carried in silence because you didn't want to burden anyone else. All of it begins to rise. And though it is uncomfortable, it is also liberating. Because every emotion you reclaim brings you closer to wholeness. You begin to see that empathy without boundaries is not love, it is self-erasure. But empathy with awareness, with choice, becomes the purest form of love. You no longer give because you have to. You give because you want to. And in that freedom, your love becomes deeper, more powerful, more radiant than ever before. And something beautiful happens. People begin to experience you differently. They feel the steadiness of your energy. They sense the quiet strength beneath your softness. They respect you, not just for what you give, but for the way you honor yourself. And slowly you notice that you are no longer just surviving as an empath, you are thriving. This is the Jungian awakening. The process of individuation. The journey of becoming your whole self. It is the realization that you are not just a mirror for other people's emotions, but a soul with your own light. That you are not just the healer of others, but also the healer of yourself. And that the most profound act of love you can ever give the world is to love yourself enough to remain whole. So when you finally choose yourself, the burden you have carried for so long begins to fall away. The endless cycles of exhaustion, guilt, and silent suffering begin to break. And in their place you find a calm strength, a steady flame, a freedom you never thought was possible. You are still an empath. You are still sensitive, still compassionate, still deeply connected to the emotions around you. But now you are also something more. You are awake. There comes a moment in every empath's life when the quiet suffering becomes too heavy to bear, when the weight of carrying everyone else's emotions finally breaks something inside. And often, it doesn't happen with a dramatic explosion. It comes in silence. In the middle of the night, lying awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering why you feel so empty when you give so much. Or it comes in the middle of a conversation, when you realize you are nodding and smiling, but inside you are screaming. It comes in the smallest, quietest moments, when you notice that you have disappeared from your own life. That realization is painful. Because for so long, your identity has been built around being the one who understands, the one who listens, the one who saves. And when you begin to question that role, it feels like pulling the ground out from beneath your own feet. If I am not the caretaker, you wonder, then who am I? This is the beginning of the empath's awakening. The moment when the mask of endless giving begins to crack, and the true self starts to rise from beneath it. Jung spoke of individuation as the process of becoming whole, and for empaths, this is where it begins. By realizing that the role you have played is not the entirety of who you are. That beneath the layer of compassion, there is also a self longing to be seen, heard, and honored. At first, choosing yourself feels like betrayal. You fear you will disappoint the people who have come to rely on your endless patience. You fear you will lose love, or be rejected. And sometimes, those fears are not just in your imagination. Some people do resist. Some people who benefited from your self-sacrifice may push back, accusing you of being selfish or distant. This is the hardest part of the journey, because the temptation to return to old patterns is strong. But the truth is, when you begin to choose yourself, you are not betraying others, you are betraying the lie that your only value is in what you give away. You are breaking the chain of self-abandonment. You are stepping into authenticity. And though it is frightening, it is also the only path to freedom. As you walk this path, you begin to discover something you may have never truly experienced before: your own boundaries. And boundaries, for an empath, are not walls to keep people out. They are bridges that allow you to meet others without losing yourself. They are the invisible lines that say, "This is where I end, and you begin. This is what I can hold, and this is what I cannot." At first, boundaries feel unnatural. Every no that escapes your lips feels heavy, as if you are failing someone. But slowly, you realize that every no to others is also a yes to yourself. A yes to your well-being, your peace, your soul. And as you begin to honor those yes, you feel a new strength rising within you. And then comes the shadow. Jung called it the hidden part of ourselves we push away. For empaths, the shadow often holds all the emotions we have swallowed to keep the peace. The anger we never expressed. The grief we never shared. The desires we suppressed to be the perfect friend, the perfect child, the perfect partner. When you stop abandoning yourself, all of this begins to rise. And though it is uncomfortable, it is not here to destroy you. It is here to make you whole. Because you cannot live fully while rejecting parts of yourself. The shadow holds not only pain, but also strength. In your anger, there is the power to say no. In your grief, there is the courage to let go. In your desires, there is the spark of who you were always meant to become. And slowly, you begin to realize that choosing yourself is not selfish. It is sacred. It is the moment when the empath becomes not only a mirror of others, but a light for themselves. You begin to live differently. Your relationships shift. Some fade away, but the ones that remain become deeper, because they are no longer built on your self-erasure. They are built on truth. And the greatest shift of all is the way you feel inside. The exhaustion that once followed you everywhere begins to loosen its grip. The heaviness that weighed on your chest begins to lift. You start to breathe more freely. You feel a calmness, a steadiness, a presence you had not known before. Because now, you are no longer just reacting to everyone else. You are rooted in yourself. And here is the miracle: when you choose yourself, your empathy does not disappear. It becomes stronger. Because now, you give not from emptiness, but from fullness. You care not from obligation, but from freedom. You love not because you fear being unloved, but because it flows naturally from a soul that is finally whole. This is the Jungian awakening for empaths. The moment when you stop confusing sacrifice with love, silence with peace, being needed with being valued. The moment when you realize that true compassion must begin with yourself. And once you step into this truth, there is no going back. Because you have tasted what it means to live as both empath and individual, tender, but unbroken. There is a reason the path of the empath is both beautiful and painful. It begins long before adulthood, long before you even knew what the word empath meant. Think back to your earliest years. You were not just a child learning about the world. you were a child feeling the world. Every shift in your family's mood, every unspoken tension, every sigh and every silence landed in your small heart as if it were your responsibility to fix. When others were loud, you became quiet. When others were upset, you became careful. When others were broken, you became the glue. And because children make sense of the world through feeling rather than reason, you began to form a silent belief that love had to be earned through caretaking. That safety came only when you were pleasing, soothing, adjusting. That your value was tied not to who you were, but to how much you could absorb. This is where the empaths pattern begins. Not in adulthood, but in childhood, in the unspoken rules written deep inside you. Carl Jung would call this the beginning of the shadow. The parts of yourself you pushed down in order to survive. The loudness you silenced. The anger you swallowed. The needs you ignored. You buried them, not because they were unworthy, but because you thought they threatened love. And so, a split formed inside you. On the outside, the tender giver. On the inside, the silenced self. As adults, empaths repeat this pattern without even realizing it. You become the reliable friend, the patient partner, the employee who never says no. And in moments when your own needs rise up, the guilt comes flooding in. You hear the same old voice whispering, if you choose yourself, you will lose love. And so you give again, and again, and again. Until you are not living, you are only serving. But the awakening begins the moment you see this pattern for what it is. When you realize that the guilt you feel for saying no is not truth, it is conditioning. When you realize that the exhaustion you carry is not proof of your strength, it is proof of how long you have abandoned yourself. When you realize that the love you thought you had to earn was always yours to claim. This is where the healing of the inner child begins. Because inside every empath is that younger self who still believes they must shrink, bend, and sacrifice to be loved. And the only way forward is to return to that child within you, to sit with them in compassion, and whisper the words they never heard, you are enough as you are. You are safe even when you say no. You are loved even when you are not fixing anyone. At first, this healing feels foreign. Because for so many years, you have comforted others while neglecting your own pain. To turn inward to comfort yourself feels unnatural. But with practice, you begin to build a new relationship with your own heart. You begin to give yourself what you so freely gave away. Patience, understanding, forgiveness, love. And as this healing deepens, something incredible happens. The guilt that once crushed you begins to loosen its hold. You no longer confuse boundaries with cruelty. You no longer confuse silence with rejection. You no longer confuse saying no with being unloving. You begin to see that love rooted in guilt is not love at all, it is control. And by releasing that guilt, you finally step into love that is free. And your relationships begin to shift. Some may resist, because they were comfortable with the version of you who always bent, always gave, always carried. But the relationships that remain become more honest, more balanced, more alive. Because now, you are no longer loved for what you can provide. You are loved for who you are. And perhaps the most profound shift of all is how you begin to experience your empathy. It is no longer a burden that leaves you drained. It becomes a gift that flows naturally. You still feel deeply, but you are no longer swallowed by what you feel. You can stand beside someone in pain without drowning in it. You can witness suffering without confusing it with your responsibility. You can love fully, while also loving yourself. This is what Jung meant by individuation, the process of becoming whole. For the empath, it is the journey of weaving back together all the parts you abandoned. The child who silenced their needs. The shadow that carried your unspoken emotions. The adult who finally learns to stand in both compassion and strength. Together, they become one. And when this happens, something beautiful is born. You begin to embody a presence that is both soft and unshakable. You no longer fear being called too sensitive, because you see sensitivity as your strength. You no longer chase love through sacrifice, because you know love begins within you. You no longer disappear in the weight of others, because you have discovered the ground of your own soul. This is the true awakening of the empath. Not the end of your sensitivity, but the beginning of your freedom. Not the closing of your heart, but the strengthening of it. Not the rejection of others, but the remembrance of yourself. And once you taste this truth, the world feels different. The same storms still rage around you, but you are no longer pulled into every current. You can feel without being consumed. You can love without being lost. You can finally walk in the world as who you were always meant to be, tender, compassionate, and whole. There comes a stage in the empath's journey when awareness alone is not enough. You see the patterns. You know the weight you carry is not fully yours. You recognize the moments you abandon yourself. But recognition without practice can still leave you stuck. This is where the real work begins, the daily, steady, often quiet practice of reclaiming your energy. Because energy is what defines an empath's life. You are sensitive not only to emotions, but to spaces, to voices, to silences, even to the subtle shifts most people never notice. And for years, your energy has been pulled outward, stretched thin like a thread trying to hold too much. To change this, you must begin learning to bring that thread back to yourself. The first step is awareness in real time. Imagine being in a conversation where someone's sadness begins to flood you. Instead of instantly absorbing it, pause. Breathe. Ask yourself softly, is this feeling mine or theirs? That question alone is revolutionary. Because for empaths, feelings blur. You forget where you end and the other begins. By pausing, you begin to untangle the knot. And when you realize the heaviness is not yours, you do not need to reject the person. You simply return the feeling back to its owner. This does not mean you are cold. It means you are compassionate without being consumed. It means you care without carrying. At first, this feels unnatural. But with practice, it becomes the foundation of emotional freedom. The second practice is creating space. Empaths often live without space because their lives are crowded with other people's needs. But silence, solitude, and rest are not luxuries for you, they are survival. Time alone is where you release what is not yours. Time and stillness is where you hear your own soul again. Without this space, you cannot thrive. So you begin carving it out, gently but firmly, as if your life depends on it, because it does. Then comes the body. Empaths often live in their hearts and minds, but forget their bodies. Yet your body is the anchor that keeps you grounded. Notice when your shoulders tighten, when your chest feels heavy, when your stomach knots. These are signals that you are carrying too much. Instead of ignoring them, you learn to listen. You stretch, you breathe, you move, you rest. This simple act of caring for your body is also caring for your soul. And slowly, you learn that boundaries are not just spoken, they are energetic. Your presence itself begins to communicate your limits. People feel it when you are no longer endlessly available. They sense it when you hold your energy close. And though some may resist, most begin to adjust, because your steadiness demands respect. This practice of reclaiming your energy does not mean you stop feeling. In fact, you feel more clearly. Because when you are not drowning in everyone else's emotions, you begin to feel your own. You rediscover what joy feels like when it is not overshadowed by guilt. You rediscover what peace feels like when it is not tied to fixing others. You rediscover what love feels like when it is not a transaction, but a natural flow from within. This is where the empath's sensitivity shifts from a burden into a power. Because your ability to feel is no longer scattered. It is focused. You can sense truth more easily. You can see through false words, false intentions, false connections. Your empathy becomes wisdom. Your compassion becomes strength. Carl Jung spoke of individuation as not just self-awareness, but self-realization. The empath's individuation is this: learning that your sensitivity is not here to destroy you. It is here to guide you. But only when you honor yourself first. Only when you allow your energy to belong to you. Only when you remember that you, too, are deserving of care. And as you practice this day by day, you begin to notice your life shifting in subtle but profound ways. You wake with less heaviness. You walk into rooms without feeling instantly drained. You engage in conversations without losing yourself in them. You begin to laugh more, breathe more, rest more. And for the first time, you realize that being an empath does not mean you are destined for suffering. It means you are destined for awareness, for depth, for connection, but only if you remain whole within yourself. And so, the empath who once lived only as a sponge, endlessly absorbing, becomes something far greater. A lighthouse. A steady flame. A presence that shines not because it is burning itself out, but because it is nourished, cared for, protected. A light that guides others without ever dimming itself. This is the deeper awakening, the moment you begin to live not as a burdened empath, but as an empowered one. Tender, but no longer broken. Sensitive, but no longer fragile. Connected, but no longer lost. And then comes the moment every empath longs for but rarely allows themselves to imagine. The moment when you finally realize that the life you have been dreaming of is not outside of you. It is within you. For so long, you have carried the weight of everyone else's pain, every unspoken word, every silent disappointment, every emotion that wasn't yours to hold. You have given endlessly, loved unconditionally, absorbed completely, and yet you often felt emptier for it. But now, that emptiness begins to transform into something vast, spacious, and luminous. You begin to understand that choosing yourself is not a one-time act, but a lifelong practice. It is waking each morning and deciding, quietly but firmly, that your energy, your heart, and your soul are yours to tend first. It is noticing, in every interaction, when you are absorbing what is not yours. When you are overextending to please. When your boundaries are being crossed because you have allowed them to be invisible. And it is gently, persistently, reclaiming that space, one moment at a time. And as you do, the world begins to change around you. Relationships that once drained you start to transform. Some people will leave, the ones who depended on your endless giving without gratitude. That is not loss, it is liberation. And the ones who remain, the friends, the partners, the family who respect and honor you, their love deepens, because it is no longer conditional on your self-erasure. You learn that you can be fully present, fully compassionate, and still remain intact. Work becomes different too. You no longer push yourself to exhaustion to prove worth. You no longer absorb every tension, every unspoken complaint, every subtle frustration. Instead, your sensitivity becomes a tool, a quiet guide that helps you navigate people, energy, and situations with clarity rather than chaos. You can engage fully without losing yourself. You can offer insight, support, and care without trading your peace for it. Your presence is steady, your voice is calm, your choices are deliberate. And for the first time, your work and life no longer leave you depleted. Within yourself, the transformation is even deeper. The child you silenced so long ago finally has a voice. The anger you buried, the grief you ignored, the longing you suppressed, all of it rises, not to destroy you, but to integrate. You cradle it, you witness it, you give it the space it was denied. And in doing so, you reclaim yourself. The shadow, once feared, becomes an ally. It guides you, strengthens you, and reminds you of your own wholeness. You begin to feel emotions differently. Not less, not muted, but without being consumed. You can sit with someone else's pain and not absorb it. You can witness suffering without carrying it. You can love without sacrificing yourself. Compassion becomes a choice rather than a burden. Sensitivity becomes a gift rather than a trap. You are no longer a mirror of the world's pain. You are a lighthouse, steady in the storm, shining without burning out. And slowly, imperceptibly at first, you notice freedom. Freedom in your body, shoulders lighter, chest less heavy, mind calmer. Freedom in your heart, no longer racing to fix, to soothe, to carry. Freedom in your soul, quiet, steady, anchored in your own truth. You breathe easier. You laugh more. You rest deeply. You no longer apologize for existing. You no longer diminish your voice to make others comfortable. You no longer confuse love with obligation, giving with self-worth, sacrifice with connection. This is the culmination of the empath's journey. The awakening Jung described not only as self-awareness, but as self-realization. The integration of child, shadow, and adult. The reclaiming of energy, boundaries, and voice. The understanding that your deepest gift, your empathy, reaches its truest power not when you are depleted, but when you are whole. And in this wholeness, life finally feels expansive. The storms around you still rage, but you are no longer pulled into every current. You can feel deeply without drowning. You can love fully without losing yourself. You can be tender without being weak. You can be present without being consumed. You can exist, truly, fully, beautifully exist, as the empath you were always meant to be. And then, perhaps most profoundly, you understand what it means to be human and sensitive in this world. Your heart, once fragile, is now steady. Your presence, once overlooked, is now luminous. Your love, once tangled in guilt, is now free. You have learned that the most courageous act an empath can take is to honor themselves. That the most radical love is the love you give yourself first. That the most profound freedom is the freedom to feel, to exist, and to live without sacrificing your soul. This is the life of an empath who has chosen themselves. Whole, radiant, awake, and unbroken. Tender, yes, but unshakable. Sensitive, yes, but empowered. Connected, yes, but free. You are no longer just surviving. You are thriving. You are no longer just existing. You are alive in every sense of the word. And for the first time, you feel the truth of it. You were never broken. You were always whole, waiting for the moment you remembered it. You have always felt too much. Too much sadness, too much joy, too much anger, too much love, and it has made life feel like carrying a weight no one else can see. You have walked through rooms full of people and felt the invisible burdens they carry, as if their pain has secretly seeped into your bones. You have cried silently over things you cannot change, held the invisible wounds of others as if they were your own, and wondered why the world seems so cruel to those who only want to feel deeply and care genuinely. For a long time, you thought this was your curse. That maybe you were too fragile, too sensitive, too different to survive in a world that celebrates numbness and ignores depth. But what if I told you this is not a curse? What if I told you that the very thing that makes you feel broken is the thing that can save you, if only you learn to carry it differently? Because being an empath is not about weakness. It is not about being a doormat. It is not about losing yourself in other people's chaos. It is about being a vessel, but one that finally learns how to protect itself. You have spent so many years absorbing the pain of others, holding it as if it were your own, and in the process, you have forgotten the most important person in the world, yourself. You have forgotten that your own heart deserves care, your own soul deserves rest, and your own mind deserves peace. For decades, maybe, you have given endlessly. You have listened when no one else would. You have comforted those who have hurt you. You have smiled through exhaustion because you thought kindness required sacrifice. And slowly, almost without noticing, you became invisible in your own life. You started to think that loving deeply meant disappearing. You told yourself that your worth was measured by how much you could carry for others, and in believing that, you let yourself carry far more than any human being should. The weight became unbearable, but no one else saw it. No one asked if you were tired. No one asked if your heart needed rest. And so you learned to hide your pain, to keep giving, keep loving, keep smiling, until the quiet ache inside became a constant companion. The kind of ache that no one else can feel, because it lives in the spaces only empaths can see. And yet, here is the truth that most people will never understand. You were never weak for feeling too much. You were never wrong for caring too deeply. You were never flawed for being sensitive. You were built this way for a reason. Your heart was meant to feel. Your soul was meant to hold beauty, sorrow, and love in ways the world cannot. The world may try to punish you for it, to drain you, to make you doubt yourself, but the depth you carry is sacred. It is your gift. The moment you begin to understand this is the moment everything starts to shift. The empath begins to see that the burden they carry is not theirs to carry alone. They begin to see that loving without boundaries is not love, it is self-erasure. They begin to understand that in order to help others, they must first learn how to protect themselves. And the moment they start to make choices for themselves, to rest, to say no, to reclaim their energy, the chains start to fall away, one by one. At first, it is terrifying. The people who relied on your endless giving may resist. They may accuse you of being selfish, cold, or uncaring. They may push back, trying to pull you back into the role they have always depended on you for. And it hurts, because for so long, your empathy was tied to survival, and now survival feels like refusing to be drained. But with each step, the empath begins to feel a strange, beautiful freedom, the freedom of choosing themselves, of honoring their own needs, of standing in their own light without guilt. This is where true healing begins. It is quiet, subtle, but revolutionary. You start to notice your own thoughts and feelings more clearly. You start to recognize the subtle signs of exhaustion before it overwhelms you. You start to laugh without the weight of others' sorrow pressing down. You start to breathe in a way that feels alive, not heavy. And with this growing awareness comes the deepest understanding of all, that your empathy is not a weakness, it is a power. But power must be respected, nurtured, and protected, or it will consume you. And in this protection, the empath begins to find balance. They learn that boundaries are not walls. They are gates that allow love to flow without destroying the heart that gives it. They learn that saying no is not cruelty, it is survival. They learn that rest is not laziness, it is sacred. They learn that self-care is not indulgence, it is the lifeblood of the soul. The journey is long. The shadows of old patterns linger. Guilt, fear, doubt, they visit, whispering that choosing yourself is wrong, that setting boundaries is selfish, that your sensitivity is a flaw. And yet, the empath begins to recognize these whispers for what they are, echoes of a world that never understood depth. And slowly, steadily, they reclaim their power. You begin to see that the relationships that drain you are not yours to save. You begin to see that the people who only take cannot love you fully, because they are too busy needing. You begin to create space for those who respect your energy, honor your heart, and mirror back the love you give in return. And with this space, a new kind of connection blooms, one that is reciprocal, nourishing, and real. And then the empath discovers the most beautiful, terrifying, and liberating truth of all. The person they were searching for their whole life has been waiting inside them. The one who can offer unconditional love, true care, and absolute respect is themselves. You are the friend, the healer, the guardian you have been seeking. And only when you hold yourself with this reverence can you finally offer your gift to the world without being lost in it. From here, life transforms. The heaviness lifts. Colors become brighter. Music flows through you like wind through trees. Laughter becomes deep and unburdened. Tears fall freely, not because of the weight of others, but because your heart has finally found its own rhythm. And as you step fully into this freedom, you realize something so profound. Your empathy was never meant to be a curse. It was always meant to be your greatest strength. And now, finally, the empath can walk through the world without losing themselves, carrying not the burden of others, but the light of their own being. You begin to notice the moments when your heart aches without reason, and slowly you realize it is not without reason at all. It is the echo of years spent holding everything for everyone else, absorbing sorrow that was never meant to be yours, carrying the burdens of hearts that could not see yours. For so long, you have lived like this, an unseen vessel for the world's pain. And now, when you pause for even a single breath, you feel the truth of what it has cost you. The exhaustion that seeps into your bones. The quiet loneliness that clings to your chest even in crowded rooms. The relentless tension of knowing the world will always need you, yet never truly see you. And it is overwhelming, because you are not made to numb yourself. You are made to feel. And yet, in that heaviness, something stirs. A tiny flicker at first, almost imperceptible. A whisper from within, reminding you that your heart was not built to be a prison for others' pain. A whisper that says it is time to learn to carry yourself first. It is time to rest. It is time to reclaim the energy that has been slowly siphoned away for years. It is terrifying, because you have been trained to believe that to choose yourself is selfish, unkind, even wrong. But now, standing at this threshold, you feel the raw, undeniable truth. Your own life has been waiting for you to step into it. The first steps are the hardest. You begin to notice the subtle ways you have been bending, shrinking, and disappearing. The times you laughed when your heart was heavy. The moments you agreed when you wanted to say no. The endless nights of giving, until your own soul was an echo of what it once was. And for a long time, you feel guilty at the thought of choosing yourself. You remember all the faces who depended on you. All the voices that needed your comfort. All the pain you have carried for others. But slowly, something shifts, because you start to realize that carrying it does not make you better. It does not make you kind. It does not make you strong. It only makes you smaller. You begin to meet your shadow. The anger you buried, the exhaustion you denied, the resentment you whispered in your heart when no one was looking. It feels raw at first. Uncomfortable. Like meeting a stranger inside yourself. But as you sit with it, as you breathe into it, something miraculous begins to happen. You understand that these feelings are not enemies. They are signals, guiding you back to what is truly yours. They are proof that your soul has been listening to itself all along, even when you were too busy caring for everyone else. And as you start to honor these parts of yourself, you discover the power of boundaries. Not the kind that wall you off from the world, but the kind that protect the sacred space of your heart. Saying no longer feels like betrayal. Resting no longer feels like weakness. And the first time you step back from the endless demands, the first time you put your own needs above others for even a few moments, you feel a weight lift that you did not even know you were carrying. You feel lighter, not because the world has changed, but because you have finally started to change your relationship with it. It is not an instant transformation. There are setbacks. Old patterns rise like waves, trying to pull you back under. Guilt whispers, fear trembles, and doubt creeps in at night. But each time you pause, each time you honor yourself, you build a new kind of strength. A quiet, steady, unshakable strength. The strength to love without losing yourself. The strength to care without being drained. The strength to stand tall in your own truth, even when the world expects you to bend. And slowly, a new clarity emerges. You begin to see the difference between those who take endlessly and those who give in balance. You begin to recognize the energy vampires, the ones who rely on your heart to fill their emptiness. You begin to honor yourself enough to let them go, even if it hurts. And when you do, an astonishing thing happens. Space opens. Space for joy. Space for peace. Space for connection that does not deplete you. And in that space, you begin to meet yourself again, the part of you that has always been waiting to be held, nurtured, and celebrated. Empathy, you realize, is not a weakness. It is a gift that demands respect, first from yourself, then from others. And when you finally honor it in this way, it transforms. Your sensitivity becomes sharper, clearer, more intentional. You can feel deeply without drowning. You can love without losing yourself. You can hold space without collapsing under the weight of it. And in this, the empath begins to experience freedom that once seemed impossible. The journey is not only about protection. It is about reclaiming joy. It is about noticing beauty again. The sunlight on the wall, the wind in the trees, the quiet rhythm of your own breath. The laughter that rises from your chest and does not belong to anyone else. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, you learn to delight in yourself. Not because the world has approved, but because your soul has said yes. And here lies the most profound realization of all. Your heart has been waiting for you, not for anyone else. Your compassion has always been a beacon, but it becomes most powerful when it flows from a place of fullness rather than emptiness. When you finally carry yourself with the same tenderness you have given to others, the weight of being an empath transforms. It no longer crushes you. It no longer confines you. It becomes the river of power, clarity, and purpose that you were always meant to navigate. And in this moment, when you breathe deeply into the freedom you have begun to claim, you see a truth so simple yet so radical. Choosing yourself is not selfish. It is survival. It is wisdom. It is the ultimate act of love for yourself and for the world that finally receives you whole. You start to notice how heavy life used to feel, how every interaction, every glance, every sigh from another person once tugged at your chest like invisible chains. You remember the nights you lay awake listening to the sounds of the world, and somehow you felt responsible for every sorrow, every injustice, every crack in someone else's heart. You wonder why you could never switch it off, why the world's pain always found a home inside your own. And in those moments, the empath begins to realize that this sensitivity is not a flaw. It is a gift that was never meant to be wasted on people who cannot see its value. For so long, you have been invisible, giving and giving until your own reflection began to fade. You have smiled when your heart was breaking, whispered words of comfort when your soul screamed for help, and held spaces for people who never held a single piece of you. And slowly, the empath learns that giving endlessly without receiving is not love. It is survival on borrowed time. And when you finally acknowledge this, a strange mixture of grief and relief rises within you. Grief for all the moments you lost, relief for the first glimpse of freedom. You begin to feel the first tremors of change when you recognize the patterns that have controlled your life. The ways you have apologized for existing, the ways you have silenced your own needs to avoid conflict, the ways you have carried other people's storms as if they were your own responsibility. And as you begin to name these patterns, something shifts. There is clarity in seeing the invisible. There is power in finally understanding that you are not weak for feeling deeply, but that your gift must be honored, not exploited. The next steps are subtle, but profound. You start by noticing yourself. You notice when your energy is being drained. You notice when you are stretching too thin, giving pieces of your soul that were never asked for. You notice when your heart is heavy for no reason other than absorbing the weight of someone else's invisible pain. And in noticing, you begin to reclaim. You begin to protect. You begin to say yes to yourself in ways that feel foreign at first. Yes to rest, yes to joy, yes to silence, yes to space. And with each yes to yourself, the empath begins to feel the weight lift. The exhaustion that has clung to your bones begins to loosen. The anxiety that has whispered constantly in the back of your mind begins to quiet. And you realize, with a profound sense of awe, that the world has not ended because you stopped carrying everyone else's pain. In fact, something miraculous happens. The more you care for yourself, the more you can care for others without losing your soul. Shadow work deepens here. You meet the parts of yourself that you once hid. The anger at being used, the sadness at being unseen, the exhaustion at carrying too much. You sit with them. You breathe into them. And slowly, you begin to understand that these shadows are not enemies. They are messengers. They are the voice of your soul saying, "You are worthy, you are human, you are enough." And in embracing them, you discover wholeness that you never knew existed. You start to see the difference between those who take endlessly and those who can give in balance. You start to notice the people who drain you, who demand more than they ever give, who lean on your heart without considering its weight. And for the first time, you feel the strength to let them go. Not out of anger, not out of resentment, but out of love for yourself. Because you realize that your compassion does not require sacrifice. It requires boundaries. It requires discernment. It requires courage. And as you step further into this freedom, you notice the subtle joys that life has always held but you were too heavy to see. The sunlight filtering through the window, the sound of laughter that is not borrowed from someone else's pain, the gentle rhythm of your own breath. You begin to delight in your own life, not as a distraction from others' suffering, but as a reclamation of the one life you have always had the right to live fully. And here is the most beautiful, terrifying truth: the person who can love you fully, without conditions, without exploitation, without taking, has always been inside you. Your heart is the friend you have been seeking. Your soul is the safe space you have been longing for. And only when you hold yourself with this care and reverence can you truly extend your empathy to the world without being consumed. You realize that freedom is not a single moment, but a series of choices. Choosing rest over exhaustion. Choosing truth over silence. Choosing yourself over constant giving. Each choice builds a fortress around your soul, not to shut the world out, but to allow the right energy to enter. And within this fortress, your sensitivity transforms. It becomes focused, intentional, powerful. You can feel without drowning. You can love without losing yourself. You can shine without burning. And in this moment, the empath finally understands. The emotional burden was never theirs to carry alone. It was a teacher, a guide, a path leading to strength, clarity, and wholeness. And now, for the first time, they walk into the world not as a vessel for everyone else's pain, but as a being fully alive, fully aware, fully themselves. And as you breathe into this freedom, you know one final truth: choosing yourself is not selfish. It is sacred. It is survival. It is the ultimate act of empathy, for yourself and for the world that finally receives you whole. You start to notice the quiet moments in your day, where the world no longer presses as heavily on your chest. The subtle spaces between obligations, between conversations, between the constant barrage of emotions from everyone around you. And in these spaces, something extraordinary begins to happen. You start to feel yourself again, not the part that is always bending, always giving, always absorbing, but the part that exists for its own heartbeat, its own breath, its own life. It is strange, almost shocking, to realize that you can exist without carrying the weight of everyone else. And yet, in this realization, there is a trembling kind of joy, the kind that sneaks in quietly at first, like sunlight through a crack, and then grows until it fills every corner of your being. For years you have been a mirror. You reflected emotions that were not yours. You held pain that was not yours. You carried hopes, dreams, and burdens that belonged to everyone but yourself. And you did it because it felt necessary. You thought that your worth was measured by how much you could endure. You thought that love was only valid if it demanded the sacrifice of your own soul. You thought that to be kind was to give endlessly, even when it destroyed you. And now, as you sit in this new awareness, you realize how much of your life has been stolen, not by others intentionally, but by the sheer force of your own giving without limits. But here is the turning point, the moment when the empath begins to rise. You start to make choices that feel impossible at first. You say no to obligations that drain you. You step away from conversations that twist your energy into knots. You stop excusing behavior that diminishes your spirit. And with each choice, no matter how small, a strange power awakens within you. It is not loud. It is not dramatic. It is quiet, steady, unwavering. It whispers that your life is yours, that your heart is sacred, that your presence is a gift, but only if you do not allow it to be consumed. And as this power grows, you begin to notice the people who are truly aligned with your energy. The ones who respect your boundaries, who honor your heart, who mirror back the love you give in balance. They are rare. They are precious. They are the ones who make your empathy feel like a home, not a prison. And for the first time, you realize that you do not need everyone to understand you, you do not need everyone to approve, and you do not need everyone to love you. You only need to hold yourself in the deepest regard, and the right energy will naturally find you. Shadow work deepens here. The anger you once buried rises, but it no longer frightens you. The exhaustion you once denied surfaces, but it no longer overwhelms you. The grief from years of giving without receiving is no longer a weight, but a river you can flow through, observing it, learning from it, letting it guide you to the parts of yourself that have been neglected for too long. And in this process, the empath discovers something profound. The shadows are not there to punish you. They are there to awaken you. They are the voice of your soul reminding you that you are more than the sum of what you have carried for others. They are proof that you were always meant to reclaim yourself. As this awareness expands, you notice the subtle shifts in your daily life. Your laughter feels deeper, richer, unburdened. Your breath feels lighter, freer, as if it belongs solely to you. You notice the beauty in simple things. The way the wind brushes against your skin, the soft hum of music, the quiet moments before dawn when the world is still. And you realize that these moments are not indulgence. They are reclamation. They are proof that your life, your emotions, and your energy are finally being honored. You also notice that freedom comes with a strange kind of discomfort. The world expects you to bend, to give endlessly, to remain invisible in your own life. And when you do not, when you hold your ground, there will be resistance. People will question you. People will try to pull you back into old patterns. And yes, it hurts. But with each resistance, you discover a new layer of strength. You learn that love does not require self-erasure. You learn that kindness does not require endless sacrifice. You learn that empathy, when properly honored, is not a burden, it is your superpower. And then, in the quiet moments, the empath begins to understand the most profound truth of all. Their life is theirs to live, fully, deeply, and unapologetically. Choosing yourself is not selfish. Protecting your energy is not cruel. Saying no is not unkind. And in the rare, beautiful moments when you offer your love now, it comes from a place of abundance, not depletion. It flows freely, clearly, and powerfully, and it touches lives in ways that exhaustion and self-sacrifice never could. You begin to walk through the world differently. No longer a vessel for everyone else's storms. No longer bending to expectations that never belong to you. You move with quiet authority, with presence that is calm but unshakable. People notice it. Some are drawn to it, some are unsettled by it, but none can diminish it. Because it is yours. Because it comes from a place that no one can touch, the heart of an empath who has finally learned to honor themselves. And slowly, step by step, you begin to live the life you were always meant to have. The life where your depth is celebrated rather than exploited. The life where your sensitivity is recognized as power rather than fragility. The life where your empathy becomes a guiding light, not a heavy chain. And in this life, the empath finally realizes, freedom is not a destination. It is a choice. Every day. Every moment. And the moment you choose yourself, fully, unreservedly, the weight lifts, the heart opens, and the world finally feels like it belongs to you too. And now, the empath reaches the moment they have been waiting for all their life. The moment when the weight of the world finally stops pressing on their chest, and they realize something so profound it almost takes their breath away. All those years of giving, of absorbing, of bending and shrinking, they were not wasted. They were preparation. They were the soil in which their strength, wisdom, and clarity could grow. And in this moment, the empath understands for the first time that freedom was never about escaping the world. It was about learning how to stand in it fully, deeply, and without losing themselves. The journey here has been long. There were moments when the heart screamed in exhaustion, when tears fell silently into empty rooms, when hope seemed like a fragile, distant flame. There were times when it felt impossible to carry on, when the burden of being too sensitive, too caring, too much for the world threatened to crush every ounce of life from within. And yet here you are. You have made it. Not because the world changed, but because you did. You chose yourself. You chose to honor your heart, to protect your energy, to reclaim the space that is sacredly yours. Shadow work becomes no longer a frightening task, but a sacred ritual. The anger you buried, the grief you denied, the exhaustion you ignored, all of it is now recognized, welcomed, and integrated. You no longer see these feelings as weaknesses or flaws. You see them as markers of your depth, proof that your heart has always been alive, sensitive, and unrelenting in its capacity to care. And in embracing these shadows, you discover wholeness. You are no longer scattered pieces. You are complete. You are unbreakable. The boundaries you set do not isolate you. They illuminate you. They allow the light of your empathy to shine without being swallowed. And with these boundaries, a new kind of connection begins to blossom. Relationships that are reciprocal, nourishing, and authentic find their way to you naturally. People who respect your heart, honor your time, and cherish your energy surround you. And in these relationships, you experience something you may never have known before, a love that does not demand sacrifice, a care that does not drain, a presence that mirrors back the respect you have always longed for. You also notice something beautiful happening inside yourself. The restless mind quiets. The anxious heart softens. The subtle grief you carried for so long transforms into gratitude, clarity, and a gentle, deep joy. You start to laugh fully, breathe fully, and exist fully. The world does not feel like a weight anymore. It feels like a mirror in which your strength, your depth, and your love are reflected back at you. And in this reflection, you finally see the person who has been waiting for your care, the one who will never abandon you, never judge you, never drain you. You see yourself? And in seeing yourself fully, the empath realizes the ultimate truth: you were never meant to give endlessly without receiving. You were never meant to shrink, hide, or erase your own needs. You were meant to live fully, feel deeply, love generously, and protect fiercely. And when you do, the world does not crumble. It transforms. Because an empath who chooses themselves does not diminish the world, they illuminate it. They offer their love from abundance, not emptiness, and in doing so, they become a force that inspires, heals, and nurtures without ever being consumed. There will still be challenges. Old patterns will rise. People will resist. Life will test your boundaries. And yes, it will sometimes feel uncomfortable, even painful. But the empath now knows the difference between the weight that belongs to them and the weight that does not. They have learned that to care is not to carry everything, to love is not to vanish, and to be sensitive is not to be weak. Each choice to honor themselves, each act of protection, each moment of conscious presence, reinforces a strength that is steady, enduring, and radiant. And finally, in the deepest silence of their heart, the empath feels it, the liberation of being fully themselves. Not bending for approval, not sacrificing for validation, not disappearing for anyone else. The empath stands whole, alive, free. Their sensitivity is no longer a burden. Their depth is no longer a liability. Their heart, once overfilled with the sorrow of the world, is now overflowing with the sacred joy of being fully, unapologetically, and beautifully themselves. And in this freedom, the empath discovers the most profound secret of all. Choosing themselves was never an act of selfishness. It was the ultimate act of love. Love for the heart that carries the weight of the world. Love for the mind that has never stopped caring. Love for the soul that has always deserved to be seen. And only when the empath embraces this truth can they finally step into the world and shine, not as a vessel for everyone else's pain, but as a being of clarity, depth, and unshakable light. This is the moment when the empath finally understands. Life is no longer about surviving other people's storms. It is about standing in your own sun, letting your heart guide you, letting your sensitivity be your compass, and letting your empathy be your power. And in this truth, the empath walks fully free, fully whole, and fully alive, carrying not the burdens of others, but the brilliance of their own soul. There is a silence that no one notices until it arrives, the silence of an empath who has finally had enough. For months, maybe years, they gave everything. They became the steady shoulder, the open heart, the endless well of comfort. They carried the wounds of someone else as if they were their own, believing that love meant sacrifice and sacrifice meant worth. But one day, without warning, something inside them shifts. The smile fades. The listening ear grows still. The light that once poured so freely begins to dim. And to the one who fed on their kindness, this silence is shocking. To the empath, though, it is not an ending, it is the beginning of the final stage. Carl Jung knew this moment well. He believed that when the soul has been ignored for too long, it rebels. It pushes back against the patterns that suffocate it, even if breaking them feels unbearable. For the empath trapped in narcissistic abuse, this rebellion is the turning point. It is the soul whispering, enough. But before the whisper comes, there is breaking. The empath does not collapse in one instant. The breaking is gradual, like glass cracking under pressure. At first, the empath doubts themselves. They wonder if they are overreacting, if their feelings are too much, if they should simply love harder. The narcissist encourages this doubt, planting seeds of guilt and self-blame. Every cruel word is disguised as truth. Every manipulation is painted as care. And the empath, hungry to believe in love, takes it in. This is the stage of erosion. Piece by piece, their sense of self wears away. They lose the ability to tell where they end and where the narcissist begins. They second-guess every instinct. They live in a fog of confusion, clinging to moments of false affection, while ignoring the steady drip of harm. Jung called this the danger of projection. The narcissist projects their wounds, their rage, their emptiness, onto the empath, who absorbs it as if it were their own. The empath begins to believe they are the broken one. They take responsibility for feelings that are not theirs, for darkness that never belonged to them. They lose themselves in someone else's shadow. But here lies the paradox. The more the empath loses themselves, the closer they come to awakening. Because even in the deepest fog, a small flame remains. A flicker of intuition that says something is not right. At first, they silence it. They cover it with guilt, with excuses, with more giving. But the flame does not go out. It grows with every betrayal, with every moment of neglect, with every wound disguised as love. And then it happens. The breaking point. For some empaths, it comes in a single sharp moment, a cruel word spoken at the wrong time, a betrayal too deep to ignore. For others, it comes in quiet accumulation, small cuts that finally bleed together into clarity. However it comes, it feels like waking up. The fog lifts, and they see the pattern for what it truly is. This awakening is both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying, because it means admitting that the love they built their life around was never love at all. Liberating, because for the first time, they realized the problem was never them. Jung described this as confronting the shadow. The empath, in seeing the abuse clearly, is also forced to see their own patterns, their need to save, their fear of abandonment, their belief that their worth depends on giving. This is painful. It feels like betrayal from both sides, betrayal from the narcissist, and betrayal from their own old self. But it is also the doorway. The only way forward is through. And this is why the final stage begins not with fire, not with rage, but with silence. The empath does not explode. They do not scream. They simply stop. They stop explaining, stop defending, stop carrying. They step back. They withdraw. They let the silence speak. To the narcissist, this silence is the darkest revenge. It is a mirror they cannot escape. Without the empath's energy to feed on, they are left with themselves, and the emptiness they spent so long hiding. To the empath, however, this silence is survival. It is the beginning of individuation, the process Jung saw as the true path of the soul. For the first time, the empath begins to imagine a life outside the cycle. They begin to feel the weight of their own needs, their own voice, their own soul. They are not fully free yet. The chains of guilt and habit are still heavy. But the lock has cracked open. And this is where the journey into the final stage truly begins. Because the empath's silence is not just an end. It is a beginning. It is the path back to themselves. When the empath begins to step back from the narcissist's grip, the silence that follows is not only outside of them, it is inside too. At first, that silence feels unbearable. For years, maybe even a lifetime, they defined themselves by giving. By being the one who listened when no one else did. By carrying the pain no one else wanted to face. Without that constant role, they feel empty, as if they have lost not only the relationship but also themselves. And this is where Carl Jung's psychology shines a light on what is happening. He wrote that the soul demands wholeness, and when it is denied, it pushes us into the shadow. The shadow is everything we reject, everything we bury, everything we refuse to see. For the empath after narcissistic abuse, the shadow holds not only pain, but also their own unspoken needs, their anger, their boundaries, their right to exist without giving. Facing the shadow is terrifying. The empath begins to feel emotions they have long suppressed. Anger rises, sharp and unfamiliar. Resentment surfaces, burning against the memory of every time they were dismissed, devalued, or used. Fear creeps in, whispering that maybe they will always be abandoned if they stop giving. And shame coils around them, reminding them of every moment they stayed when they should have walked away. But here is the truth Jung understood: the shadow is not our enemy. It is the doorway. To reject it is to stay broken. To face it is to become whole. And so, slowly, the empath begins to look. They begin to see the patterns that bound them. They see how their own wounds of childhood may have drawn them to people who mirrored that same neglect. They see how their longing to be loved turned into a habit of overgiving. They see how their fear of conflict made them accept far too little in return. Each realization feels like a cut, sharp and deep. But with each cut comes clarity. This is the stage of descent, the dark night of the empath's soul. Days feel heavy. Nights feel endless. Memories replay, not as moments of love, but as reminders of deception. The narcissist's voice still lingers in their mind, echoing in accusations, manipulations, and false affection. It feels as though even in silence, they cannot escape. And yet, this descent is necessary. Jung believed that only by walking through the darkness can we find the light that belongs to us. The empath, by facing their pain, begins to reclaim themselves. Each wave of anger shows them where their boundaries must be. Each ripple of fear teaches them where they must stand stronger. Each shard of shame, when held to the light, reveals that the guilt was never theirs to carry. The empath begins to see that what they thought was never love at all. It was dependency. It was manipulation. It was hunger disguised as intimacy. And this realization, though painful, is the seed of freedom. But freedom does not come all at once. There are setbacks. The empath may be tempted to return, drawn by habit, by guilt, by the false hope that maybe this time it will be different. The narcissist may reach out, sensing the loss of their supply, trying to pull them back with words that once held power. And in these moments, the empath must face their greatest test. Jung spoke of individuation as the integration of opposites. For the empath, this means learning to hold two truths at once, that they can love deeply, and yet say no. That they can forgive, and still walk away. That they can be kind, without being consumed. This balance is not easy. It requires practice, patience, and above all, self-compassion. Self-compassion is often the hardest part. The empath is so used to directing compassion outward that turning it inward feels selfish. But slowly, gently, they begin to practice. They allow themselves to rest without guilt. They speak to themselves with kindness instead of criticism. They permit themselves to feel joy without earning it through sacrifice. And in these small acts, something extraordinary happens. The hollow space within them begins to fill. Not with someone else's love. Not with someone else's approval. But with their own. This is the shift Jung would call the movement toward wholeness. The empath is no longer a mirror reflecting everyone else's needs. They are beginning to see their own reflection clearly for the first time. And though it feels unfamiliar, it is also powerful. They start to understand that their sensitivity, once exploited, is not a weakness. It is a strength. Their ability to feel deeply, once used against them, is also the very thing that will help them heal. Their silence, once seen as fragility, is revealed as resilience. And so the descent, painful as it is, carries within it a hidden gift. The empath discovers that beneath the layers of abuse, beneath the roles they were forced to play, beneath the silence itself, there is a self waiting to rise. This is not the end of the journey. It is the middle path, where the breaking begins to turn into rebuilding. Where the empath begins to shift from victim to survivor, from survivor to creator. The shadow has been faced, and now the light begins to return. When the empath emerges from the dark descent into shadow, they do not rise all at once. Healing is not a single explosion of light that wipes away the past. It is a slow, careful gathering of pieces, each one discovered and reclaimed with patience. The first piece is often the hardest to pick up, the realization that they are allowed to exist for themselves. For so long, their identity was tied to the needs of others. They were the listener, the giver, the comforter. Their worth seemed to be measured only by how much of themselves they could pour out. But in the silence after abuse, a new awareness begins to grow. They start to feel the truth that Jung pointed to again and again. That wholeness is found not in sacrifice, but in balance. Balance for the empath means something radical. It means learning to say no without guilt. It means choosing rest without apology. It means allowing themselves to take up space in the world without shrinking for the comfort of others. At first, these acts feel impossible. The old conditioning rises like chains, whispering that they are selfish, that they are unloving, that they will be abandoned if they stop giving. But with each small boundary held, with each moment of self-care chosen, the chains weaken. Jung described individuation as the process of becoming who we truly are, distinct from the masks we wear for others. For the empath, this process is both painful and liberating. They must let go of the mask of the eternal rescuer, the one who always saves, always forgives, always carries. This mask was never their true self. It was a role imposed upon them by those who needed their light but never offered their own. To set it down feels like losing an identity. But in truth, it is reclaiming one. The rebuilding is not only internal. It also reshapes the empath's outer world. Relationships change. Some fall away, naturally, when the empath no longer plays the role of constant giver. People who once drained them may grow angry, resentful, or distant when the supply is cut off. And while this can feel like loss, it is also clarity. Those who only stayed for what they could take are gone. What remains are relationships that are real, mutual, equal, built on respect rather than exploitation. This shift can be lonely. The empath may feel the absence of old connections like echoes in an empty room. But slowly, new connections form. Healthier bonds appear, drawn not to the empath's silence or sacrifice, but to their true self. Friendships and loves emerge that are balanced, where giving and receiving flow both ways. And in these relationships, the empath learns that love does not have to hurt, does not have to cost their soul. Internally, the empath begins to integrate what Jung called the shadow. The anger they once suppressed becomes a guide, pointing them to boundaries that must be respected. The sadness they once buried becomes a teacher, reminding them of what they truly need. The fear they once avoided becomes a compass, showing them where courage is required. These emotions, once seen as weaknesses, are revealed as essential parts of wholeness. The empath learns to stand in paradox. They discover they can be gentle and strong. They can be open and guarded. They can love deeply and still walk away when love turns into harm. This balance is the heart of the final stage. It is not about abandoning their sensitivity, but about anchoring it in strength. There is also forgiveness, but not the shallow forgiveness demanded by abusers. This forgiveness is for themselves. They forgive the version of themselves who stayed too long, who believed too much, who gave too freely. They forgive not because they were wrong, but because they were human. They were doing their best with the heart they had. And in this forgiveness, the weight of shame begins to lift. As the empath rebuilds, they also begin to create. Creativity flows where silence once lived. Some write, some paint, some build new lives from the ground up. The energy that was once consumed by survival is now free to become expression. And in that expression, the empath discovers joy that is no longer tied to another's approval. Jung believed that the final goal of the psyche was self-realization, a state where the individual lives authentically, no longer trapped in masks or shadows. For the empath, rebuilding leads directly to this realization. They no longer measure their worth by how much they give away. They measure it by their simple existence, by the truth of who they are. And so, step by step, the empath transforms. They move from the silence of survival to the voice of truth. They move from emptiness to fullness. They move from being consumed by others to living in harmony with themselves. This is not the end of the journey. The scars remain. The past does not vanish. But the empath no longer lives defined by that past. They carry it as wisdom, not as chains. They see clearly now that their sensitivity is a gift, not to be used against them, but to be guided wisely. And in this wisdom, the empath stands stronger than ever before. There comes a moment, quiet at first, when the empath realizes they no longer feel like prey. They are no longer walking through life on guard, scanning every room for danger, bracing for the next betrayal. Something inside has shifted. The trembling has stilled. The old hunger to be seen, to be loved at any cost, has burned itself out. What replaces it is not bitterness, but clarity. This clarity is the beginning of their power. For years, perhaps decades, the empath lived in patterns of self-erasure. They gave endlessly, they forgave endlessly, and they endured silently. The narcissist, the manipulator, the taker, all fed on that endless stream of light. But when the empath faces their shadow, when they reclaim their pieces, they awaken to a truth that changes everything. I do not exist to be consumed. This awakening is not a dramatic explosion. It is more like dawn, slow, steady, unstoppable. With each boundary set, each choice made for themselves, each time they refuse to collapse back into the old role, the light grows brighter. They are no longer just healing wounds. They are rewriting their entire story. Jung wrote that wholeness is not perfection, but the ability to hold opposites within us. For the empath, the rise into power means embracing their sensitivity without letting it enslave them. They can feel deeply, but they no longer drown in those feelings. They can love fully, but they no longer sacrifice themselves to prove that love. They can forgive, but they no longer forget their worth. They have become paradox made flesh, both soft and unbreakable. At this stage, the empath begins to attract different energies into their life. People sense the change. Abusers can no longer enter so easily, because the empath now carries an invisible shield, the authority of someone who knows their own value. Manipulators sense it and recoil, because exploitation thrives only where doubt lives. And instead, healthier, more authentic souls begin to gather. The empath's circle shrinks, but it strengthens. Internally, a new voice rises. It is not the old critic that whispered, "You're not enough." Nor is it the old pleaser that begged, "Give more, love more, forgive more." This new voice is firm, calm, steady. It says, I know who I am. I know what I will allow. I know what I deserve. This voice is the self that Jung described, the center of the psyche, the place of wholeness that emerges after shadow and mask have been integrated. The empath, once broken by abuse, now stands in the self like a tree rooted deep in the earth. Storms may come. Memories may rise. Grief may still ache. But nothing uproots them anymore. Their roots run too deep, nourished by every trial they have endured. The very pain that once threatened to destroy them has become the soil of their strength. There is a spiritual dimension to this rise. Many empaths report that after leaving narcissistic abuse, they feel more connected to something larger than themselves, whether they call it God, the universe, or simply life itself. This is no accident. Jung himself believed that individuation was not merely psychological, but spiritual. The deeper we integrate, the closer we move to the archetypal self, the divine image within. For the empath, surviving the abyss of abuse and climbing back into light often awakens a sense of destiny. They no longer feel like life is something that just happens to them. They feel chosen, in some mysterious way, to embody resilience, compassion, and truth. With this comes purpose. The empath begins to channel their experience into something larger. Some become healers, therapists, writers, artists. Some simply become better parents, better friends, better leaders. Whatever the form, their suffering is not wasted. It becomes fuel for service, expression, and creation. And unlike before, this service does not drain them. It strengthens them, because it comes not from a desperate need to be loved, but from the overflowing of a self already whole. The narcissist may still exist in their memory, but they no longer dominate it. The empath looks back not with longing, nor with hatred, but with a kind of detached understanding. That was a chapter. It taught me what I needed. And it ended. They are no longer bound to that story. They have outgrown it. And perhaps most importantly, the empath begins to experience joy again. Not the fragile joy that depends on another's approval, but a quiet, steady joy in simply being alive. They find beauty in small things, the sunlight through a window, the sound of their own laughter, the freedom of solitude. This joy is unshakable, because it does not come from outside. It flows from the core of the self. This, Jung would say, is the goal of all psychological development, not to become perfect, but to become whole. And in their rise into power, the empath achieves exactly that. They are no longer fragments pulled apart by abuse. They are integrated. They are balanced. They are alive in a way they never were before. The final stage is not about triumph over the narcissist. It is not about revenge or even proving anything to anyone. It is about freedom. The empath walks forward no longer defined by wounds, but by wisdom. No longer chained by fear, but guided by strength. No longer begging to be seen, but radiating from within. And that is the true final stage, the empath reborn, not as prey, not as victim, but as a whole, sovereign being. There comes a time when the wounds stop bleeding, when the heart that was once fragile no longer trembles at the thought of the past, when the empath finally steps into the last stage of their journey. This is the stage Carl Jung hinted at, the place beyond survival, beyond healing, beyond even strength. It is the stage of wholeness, the final stage of the empath after narcissistic abuse. It does not come quickly. It cannot be forced. It arrives like the slow unfolding of spring after a long winter, when the soil has finally rested and the roots below are ready to bloom. At first, the empath notices small things. They no longer feel the same sting when remembering the person who hurt them. The anger softens. The longing disappears. The silence, once heavy, becomes comforting. They no longer check the door of memory to see if the narcissist might return. Because now, they no longer need them to. This release is not indifference, it is liberation. The empath discovers that their identity is no longer built from pain. For so long, they were the survivor, the broken one, the giver who had been drained. But now, they see themselves not as wounded, but as whole. Their story is not about what was done to them, it is about who they have become through it. Jung believed that true growth comes when we integrate every part of ourselves, the light and the shadow, the broken and the strong. And that is what happens here. The empath accepts that they once gave too much, that they once endured too long, that they once lost themselves. They no longer hide these truths, nor do they hate themselves for them. They embrace them. They say, yes, that was me. And yes, that was part of my becoming. In this acceptance, they find peace. They begin to notice something remarkable. Life no longer feels like a battlefield, nor like a test. It feels like a flow. The same sensitivity that once left them vulnerable now becomes their greatest gift. They can sense when people are genuine and when they are not. They can feel the subtle energies in a room and know instantly where to give and where to withhold. Their intuition sharpens into wisdom. What was once survival becomes mastery. This mastery transforms everything. Relationships no longer drain them, because they choose differently. Work no longer enslaves them, because they know what aligns with their soul. Even solitude no longer feels like emptiness, it feels like sanctuary. They have become their own safe place. And in this stage, something even deeper awakens: compassion. Not the naive compassion that once excused abuse, but a grounded compassion born from wisdom. They can look at the narcissist and see a wounded child inside that person, lost in their own shadows. They do not excuse the harm. They do not invite it back. But they understand it. They know that the abuser was trapped in their own emptiness. And with that understanding, the empath is free, not because they forgive for the abuser's sake, but because they refuse to carry hate any longer. This compassion extends to themselves as well. They stop asking why they didn't leave sooner, why they stayed, why they gave so much. They look at their younger self, the self who loved too hard, who endured too long, and they say, "Thank you. Thank you for surviving. Thank you for loving, even when it was not returned. Thank you for carrying us here, to this place where we can finally rest." This is the essence of the final stage, self-acceptance so deep that the past loses its grip. And then, a new chapter begins. Many empaths, at this stage, feel called to create. Some write books or poems. Some paint or sing. Some build communities. Others simply live with a presence that heals everyone they touch. Their pain is no longer a prison, it has become a wellspring. And from this wellspring, beauty pours out effortlessly. Jung wrote that individuation, the process of becoming whole, is not the end of the journey, but the beginning of true life. And so it is for the empath. Once they have integrated their pain, their shadow, their light, they step into the world not as fragments, but as a complete being. They no longer orbit around others, desperate for warmth. They are their own sun, radiant and steady. This radiance is the final revenge, if one still wants to call it that. Not the revenge of silence, nor the revenge of success, but the revenge of existing fully, joyfully, freely. The narcissists, bound to their emptiness, can never touch this. They cannot even imagine it. But the empath, once broken, now lives it. And so the story closes. The empath who once wept quietly in the night now walks with calm strength. The empath who once doubted their worth now radiates it effortlessly. The empath who once thought their sensitivity was a curse now sees it as the source of their deepest wisdom. The final stage is not about forgetting the pain, nor about erasing the past. It is about weaving it all into a tapestry of meaning, where even the darkest threads give depth to the pattern. It is about standing in the fullness of who you are, without apology, without fear, without chains. And perhaps, most of all, it is about peace. The empath, after all the storms, finally comes home to themselves. And that home cannot be taken, cannot be broken, cannot be destroyed. This is the final stage. The stage of freedom. The stage of wholeness. The stage where the empath, at last, becomes complete. And in this quiet, steady wholeness, they are untouchable.